All right, good morning, everybody. I am Erin Livingston. I work here at H-GAC, and I'm going to get us started this morning. I am excited for our topic, but before we get into that, I do have to go over just a couple of things. So for those of you that are online, and I feel like maybe there's an echo, so Andrea, let me know if there is. But for those of you online, we are going to be asking that you ask questions in the chat only. We did have a large number of people register for the online portion, and so it will be easier for us to manage it in that way. So we are going to have you muted, and we are going to have your cameras turned off during the presentation. And like I said, that chat is down at the bottom. So if you want to go ahead and try out the chat to make sure everybody knows where it is, you can say good morning to us, let us know who you are and who you are with. We would appreciate that. If you are on the phone only, there is also a chat option. You access that by going to the three little dots at the bottom of your screen. And those of you that are in the room, thank you so much for joining us in person this morning. If you have not found the coffee, water, and kolaches, they are in the back over here. And if you have not found the bathroom and need to find that at some point in time, you're going to go past the elevators and go to the right. And then one more thing I did want to mention is that for those people that are joining us online to hear you, if you have a question or a comment, you do have to speak into a microphone. And so our speakers are going to be running around the room, getting the microphone in front of you if you do want to make a comment or ask a question. So just be aware of that. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to John and his team.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Erin, for the wonderful introduction, and thank you all for being a part of this today, both here in person as well as virtually. My name is John Burry, and I am doing these workshops virtually for the last 2 years. It's been good to start wearing pants again as doing these. But no, I'm sorry, that was my one dad joke for the day. Well, I can't guarantee that, but we do want to welcome you to the 2022 H-GAC workshop. Yeah, and as Erin mentioned, we do have quite a good turnout here, and they are you can't really see them on a camera here, but everybody is in the back of the room, like going to church on Sunday. So. Which is where I'm at all the time. But we do have a great team here that I think is going to be valuable in providing everyone some good perspective on disaster debris management. And so one of the first persons I want to introduce is Brian Rutherford. Brian and I have worked together for the last 15 years, and he has been our chief debris management planner for our team at Tetra Tech. Brian and I have worked on debris management plans for large communities like Los Angeles County. He's also worked in debris plans up in the Northwest, in Clackamas County, Oregon, outside of Portland. But then locally here has been a part of debris management planning efforts in everywhere from Brazoria County to DeSoto, Texas, up in the North Central Texas area, and all around the Houston-Galveston area. So what I've asked Brian to do during this presentation day is provide that local government planning perspective in creating your debris management plans and how to prepare for hurricane season or tornado, flood, wildfire season, whatever season of the year that you are preparing for. And next with me here is Ricardo Vasquez. Ricardo and I have worked together for the last 7 years. Ricardo is, and I should also mention, Brian is from Dickinson. Ricardo is in Fort Bend County or Western Harris County. He and I have worked together on a number of different disasters like the 2015 and 2016 floods here, as well as Hurricane Harvey. Most recently, Ricardo's been deployed to a number of different disasters across the U.S., including the devastating Kentucky tornadoes in December of 2021. So most recently, and then Hurricane Ida. And so Ricardo is, what I've asked him to do is when we're doing this presentation, I've asked him to really give us that field operations perspective to, talk about what's going on in the field at various moments in time, having worked with some of the nation's largest contractors, as well as various sizes of local governments. Ricardo can provide that great perspective. And then finally here, Nick Russo, who is a new member of our team, but Nick and I have worked together since 2008. And he's recently joined us from Harris County. And Nick, I've asked him to be here because of his extensive experience working as debris manager on the debris management team to provide that local government perspective in an operations capacity where, having an understanding of how things work and how things are, again, that side of the table. So, and of course, my name is John Burry, and I have been with our firm for the last 20 years, have been a partner with H-GAC. I've been privileged to have worked here for the last, I think since my entire career, since 2001, doing the first disaster debris management plan with Cheryl Murgo and the team here, and have had the opportunity to work on a number of disasters from wildfires to Hurricane Harvey here in the Houston area, also in Puerto Rico with Irma and Maria, and a number of, the Laura, the Zetas, the Sallys, a number of different disasters. And so I'll be really keeping things, moving along with the workshop today. We've got a couple of scheduled breaks during today's presentation, and maybe be able to get out of here a little bit, around that 12:15, 12:30 timeline. So we have a lot of information to cover here today. We've got, let me start figuring out how to, oh, we're good. So our agenda today is going to be a debris management 101. And here, when we say the 101, just really talk about the basics. I know there's a lot of familiar faces here and online. I mean, you got the Jamie Galloways and the Glenn Lamonts who've been a part of debris management plans and debris operations for many, many years. The Tommy Webster and Robert Heminger and Austin Appleton, who've all been a part of this. And I appreciate everybody responding to Aaron's request to put your name and your organization that you belong to in the chat. But this debris management 101 is going to be really talking about some of the basic elements of the debris process, from your right-of-way operations, your specialized debris programs, your, let's see what we have. We have debris sites, your timeline for operations, and really kind of level setting everybody. Then we've got some topics that we're going to dive into a little bit more, and that is public information, public drop-off sites, call centers. We're going to talk about how social media has transformed the landscape of debris management operations to much more of a collaborative, and you get a lot more, feedback from the public. We're talking about pre-positioned contracts, health and safety, as well as planning and preparedness activities. Later on in the presentation, we're going to drill into diversity, equity, and inclusion, which has been something that has been very much of a focus for FEMA, as well as the Biden administration, and how that awareness in emergency management as a whole, as well as debris operations, can impact how you approach operations after a disaster, as well as planning. We're going to talk about diversion from landfills and some debris management planning tools, as well as finally wrapping things up with a private property debris removal discussion for those disasters that really go above and beyond what normally occurs. So we're going to hop right into it. And again, what I do want to ask is, if for those of you here, again, thank you. We've got a couple of scheduled, breaks here. We got kolaches and coffee and water in the back. We also have restrooms right across, in the rear of the building there too. So we're going to just get right into it. So with this, with our timeline, all right. So when we talk about debris management planning and debris operations and just the whole continuum of the disaster, we really got to breaking things up into those 4 different buckets. The first one being the planning and preparedness. And you can see some of those activities that, quite frankly, this in May, with hurricane season right around the corner, starting in July, it's a great way to start dusting off some of the plans and inventorying some of your resources, as well as understanding what external resources you need. Following the disaster, you got that response period, which we count in days or weeks, potentially. Recovery, which is that multiple weeks into the months, and then long-term recovery, which is on from the months that could go on to years. And you could see that overlap. I do remember one of my favorite clients down in Brazoria County who said, when do you know when you're moving from response to recovery? And he told me, because I didn't know there was a day, if there was a week or a time of day. And he said, when somebody asks, how are we going to start paying for this? And so you can see there, as you move into response and recovery, you've got a lot of different activities, and we're going to start getting into those right now. So again, I'm going to ask Brian here to help provide some perspective on this and given his experience in planning. But in those normal operations, those activities, making sure you have the contact lists updated, evaluating those DMS locations to make sure there's not a Dollar General or a new Walmart on that debris management site that you thought you had available, a road lists and making sure those road maps, establishing and maintaining those pre-positioned contracts, and downloading the latest state and FEMA guidance. And I see a gentleman here from the Texas Division of Emergency Management here. Thank you so much for joining. And they've got a lot of those resources on there. And again, when you talk about those activities, there's a lot of things, a lot of easy things that can take half a day or even a couple of hours to make sure that you can understand what is out there and what you need to prepare for. And Brian, I know you've been working with a lot of clients in doing that.
Yeah, that's correct. So, it's really important to make sure your plans are up to date. Assuming you have a plan, we'll talk more about the planning process in a little bit. But yeah, making sure your priority roads are identified, because you want to make sure that as soon as the disaster occurs, it's getting out there and getting those priority roads cleared as quickly as possible. So, where you have a hospital or other facilities that you need to get to, like your public works facilities, to get those back up and running. So making sure you have those identified, that you can get out there and get the debris from those roads cleared quickly. Also, your major thoroughfares. You want to make sure that police and fire and EMS can get through to do what they need to do. Utility restoration companies can get through to do what they need to do, and they can if the roads are blocked. So it's kind of that all hands on deck situation when if anyone has a tool, a chainsaw, a truck, a tractor, making sure they have designated places to go to clear roads. And then making sure that your plans are up to date, because a lot of times things do change over time. The FEMA and the state will occasionally change guidelines based on past events that have occurred. There were a lot of changes, particularly after Superstorm Sandy. A lot of things changed in 2012. And so just kind of keeping up with that, with the public assistance guidelines and those that do change every so often and could be a significant change that you want to certainly address in your plan.
Thanks, Brian. When it gets into those post-event response activities, again, first thing, as Brian mentioned, was the emergency roadway clearance. You see, again, Interstate 45 after Hurricane Ike there in 2008, and how littered it was, and the ability to keep those roads open is one of the first things that you want to start thinking about and talking about. And next is those damage assessments, and then contractor activations. That's a huge decision after this disaster. And when it comes to, pulling the trigger, I know that there's a lot of opinions and a lot of feedback that you have to receive. And so, Nick, I'd like to get your perspective on when it comes to contractor activations. What are some of those decision points that you're really looking at, or you've looked at in the past, and maybe talk about?
Yeah, by now in your timeline, the disaster's here. you should have, one thing we recommend is, go through your processes and develop your own internal like in-hour sequence for days leading up to your event. And by now at this point, you should probably already been talking to your contractor assets, your monitoring contacts. At this point, you don't want to be looking around for your, a debris contractor card and a file and trying to figure out who's going to come help you. So having those conversations days leading up to this point is very good. The other thing to think about is how are you going to issue your NTPs? And what I mean by that is, what steps in your organization does it take to authorize millions of dollars of work potentially to several contractors, if you will. And at this point, you may not have power. I know everybody says, I got an emergency generator. I got a backup generator at my EOC. Well, other staff, you may not have that, or that generator's out. Another thing to think about is we may not have communication at this point with anybody internal in the organization. That's another really good thing we've stressed a lot. I would say build it into your plans. Think about, no power, no cell phones. You're probably going back to a radio system to communicate. But back to really authorizing those NTPs. So you may be deviating from what is your normal, procurement process. I've personally had to issue verbal NTPs to people with a head purchasing official behind me saying, Nick, go do this. Done it by email. I've had, purchasing authority give me codes to use because again, purchase standard, municipal systems may be down that prevent the standard process of procuring services that you need. So just be flexible and think about those things to move forward.
Thank you, Nick, for providing that perspective. So once you do activate these contracts, one of the first things you're going to be doing is beginning truck certifications and measuring these trucks for the volumetric capacity and understanding whether it's a weight-based contract or a volume-based contract, how much is out there and is it empty? And then once it goes across the scales or an inspection tower, how full that contract is. And again, having a team out there that is familiar with the process, there's a lot of great resources out there. There's a ton of information that is available, again, within the communities that are large, within the private sector, within FEMA. There's a ton of information and a ton of examples, templates that are great go-bys.
Hey, John.
Yes,
just
sir.
real quick at that stage. Okay, at this point, you're also discussing schedules, operation plans with your contractors, and think about this. You may have a lot of resources like these trucks coming into town. Sometimes you may need a staging area to do this. In some cases, a contractor may have already had that on hand. But at this point, when you're trying to get those trucks certified and ready to go and start doing your debris removal operation, you may need a place, to stage equipment and to effectively mobilize those resources.
Again, we've seen everywhere from I believe, Metro bus station parking lot. We've seen a lot of old Kmarts. If everybody remembers what Kmart was, I saw they recently went kaput. But again, a Walmart parking lot, whatever it is, just plenty of space and impervious cover so you can get those trucks in and on the streets start cleaning up debris. When it comes to those response activities, I can't stress enough how important it is to keeping the personnel, keeping the public, informed about what's going on, connecting those debris estimates. Again, if you're a city communicating with the county, if the county's communicating up with the state's implemented some new tools in order to get the damage assessment and to achieve the disaster threshold. So pushing information up and out and then down to your contractors is really, really critical in those first few days. So now we're getting into your full operation when it comes to opening your debris management sites, prioritizing these roads or areas. It might be a neighborhood that needs to be focused on. And again, when it comes, and I'm going to foreshadow in the diversity, equity, inclusion components of the plan, ensuring that where your resources are equally spread across your community and into those hardest hit areas But again, making sure that there are equal number of assets in the areas that are impacted by this disaster.
Hey, real quick.
Sure.
So at this point, a couple days in, you may be using a mix of internal resources to your municipality, your contractor resources. You may be going to straight to a landfill or something like that while you're working on getting these DMS sites set up and running. So, it's just a lot of kind of the initial steps into going into that operation.
Without a doubt there, Nick. And, and when it comes to right-of-way and your debris removal, I mean, this is a huge undertaking. And, Ricardo, I know you've been a part of a lot of these hurricane cleanups. I mean, right there, Ricardo is our program manager there in Southwest Louisiana after Hurricane Laura in Lake Charles and Westlake. One of the things I'll never forget is the mayor of Lake Charles. He was there during Hurricane Rita in 2005, and he was there in Hurricane Laura in 2020. And he said they cleared more debris in 6 weeks than they cleared in 6 months. And that was a testament to their plans and their resources. And so what are some considerations, Ricardo, that you've seen people take when deploying assets for the right-of-way collection?
So I know at the onset of these activations, you got to keep in mind that whenever these large hurricanes or natural disasters coming through, that a lot of people are leaving town. So and what we realized in Louisiana is there was a long layoff whenever people were leaving and coming back to their homes, because a lot of homes were very severely damaged. So you got to keep in mind that with these standard debris contractors, they're only allowed to pick up what's been put out. So a lot of these homes, they were essentially, the debris had been sitting for a good while. So some people were out for a month, 2 months at a time. So that's where the damage assessment really comes into play. So you want to idealize where you want to start, and then kind of keep in contact with all your constituents.
Hey guys, can you hear us?
Yes,
Can we
sir.
go put in the? All right. Okay, we're back on.
Okay, we're back on.
So Ricardo, you were talking about.
Can you hear me? Okay, this works.
Okay. All right, we're back online. Here we go.
Oh.
We're good. I can hear you now.
Great. So going back to, that's a problem we came across a lot with Louisiana, is that there's a delay in getting everybody back to get the debris pushed out in the right of way. So the one thing that helped out a lot is we would set up a call center. So with the call centers, you would have the call centers open 24/7, and then at the same time, the press releases were very crucial. So you would, with the call centers, you can see who's been coming back in. That way you can kind of focus all your assets at certain locations. At the same time, you can kind of explain the process to everybody, because not all the debris is being picked up all at once. So you'll have some residents, they can see the vehicles come through the neighborhood, and then they have questions, well, why is my debris not being picked up? So a lot of times it's certain types of debris classes that are being picked up at these times. So it's a good thing to keep in communication with everybody. That way the public's aware of the status of the operations. That way you explain to them that it's not just the one, they're gonna come through once and be gone. It's a multiple pass process. And that way they're known ahead of time when they're going to come back in to pick up the debris, and really that really helps kind of keep everything flowing, because it's not a slow process, but it takes some time, a few passes to get everything picked up.
Thanks, Ricardo. And I'll tell you, the one biggest impact is evacuations to your timeline. And then just again, if it's a devastating Cat 4, Cat 5, just to make sure that you understand, it's going to be post-event recovery is going to start 2 weeks to maybe 4 weeks after that event versus a couple of days. All right. In addition, setting up these debris management sites, these temporary locations where the debris will be stored and taken to is part and parcel to getting those trucks out. It's almost as important as getting those trucks out in the streets. They have to have a place to go. And so often sending them to landfills has been just a slowdown in, keeping things moving and in making sure those trucks can get 4, 6, 8 passes, eight turns, if you will, is critical. And I know, Nick, you guys struggle with that on a couple of occasions. And quite frankly, everybody struggles with that.
Well, yeah, especially in the urban environment, it is hard to allow for trucks, with traffic and all those sorts of things to be in a affected neighborhood and get to a disposal site. So the DMS site can be really useful. Obviously, in a wind event with a lot of down vegetation, all that stuff is typically going to be ground and managed at a DMS site. In Harvey, we in the Houston area obviously had a lot of flood debris and C&D type debris that, in the region we managed at many of these DMS sites in the area. So it was very helpful.
These DMS sites, you need to understand, could be going 24 hours a day. So having the proper lighting equipment, and I know that they were doing that in Kentucky after the tornadoes there, is again, I want to manage everybody's expectations so that could be a part of your debris site.
So the best thing that I could recommend to you here is to, while you have time, identify them, on an annual basis. I know John kind of mentioned this, but we want to stress it here. You can do it with your, internal folks. You can do it with your contractors. But looking at key sites that you would need to use could be, park sites are great, or parking lots are great. Old landfills are great. Things that have already really previously been developed often have the greatest chance of being permitted and the least amount of environmental impacts that can catch you up later down the road.
And then also to piggyback off that
Sure.
is if you got to keep in mind, if these DMS sites are close to a residential area, there's going to be quite a few complaints, especially with the reduction of the debris. You're going to receive some phone calls from some unhappy residents at times. So that's something to keep in mind for the location planning.
I think one time there was a contractor that was doing some burning at the debris sites, and they had a neighbor who was just really, really complaining a lot. And the contractor actually sent that family to Disney World for a week so that they could get all the burning done. And then they came back because they had some, some respiratory issues. But no, they were, and again, it was burning and we'll get into that. Obviously, open burning, air current incineration. There's going to be some smoke out there. There's just no way around it. Grinding obviously is a very, very common method of reduction. And again, you got to suit the reduction means to where that facility is in relation to all of the different conditions and all of the different pieces of your community.
Can you go back one slide to see if
Sure.
we skipped the preparing? Yes, this is also very important. Okay, so let's say you've identified your sites, your disasters here and you and or your contractor are going to use certain DMS sites. They all must be permitted. They must be permitted by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. That's the first step. It's always good to have your documents for these prepared, while you have time, like now. Let's say you got a park site you're going to use, have your maps and your application material ready to go, so that after the disaster, you've saved some of that time and can just move on down to, hey, TCQ, I want to use this site. Here's where it is. Maybe we've used it before. And hey, I need this quick because my contractor, I need to get going. Okay, the second part of that is this Texas Historical Commission approval. That is documenting the Section 106 Historic Preservation and Archaeological Resources issues. It is a very hot topic. Make sure you go through that step and save all the approvals so that it does not impact your FEMA reimbursement later on down the line. I'll personally tell you that the THC aspect of that is really easy. I think in the TDEM guidance on disaster planning, they've got some example forms in there. Really simple process. You just need to make sure you do it.
No, and so much of this is what his last words was, just make sure you do it. And it's a lot of this stuff can get overlooked. But again, come, a year after, 2 years after, just having that documentation in one central place is a critical step.
And then also for the DMS sites, you also got to keep in mind what's being allowed there on site. So usually, if you get a permit for a specific site, it's not just a cover all for all types of debris. Certain sites might only allow vegetation debris there, as well as the reduction methods. They might not allow burning. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially with here, more localized here in Houston, we get a lot of flooding disasters. So you're going to have a lot of white goods, a lot of e-waste. So you got to keep in mind that not everything can go to these sites, and it's very specific. So the last thing you want at the end of the project is a large quantity of debris that you had or disposed of just be completely kicked out by FEMA or any other reimbursement costs for those reasons.
That's a huge point. I mean, again, when you're getting into this phase, initiating discussions with FEMA is likely going to start occurring, as well as coordination with the Texas Division of Emergency Management, TDEM, could be TxDOT, the Texas Department of Transportation. Many of these agencies are going to start coming together. There's obviously some other components of this, like the gated community and private property debris removal efforts that may occur. Again, in Hurricane Harvey, that was very much expedited, and hopefully that'll be the case in future disasters. You are going to, again, continuing on from the weeks into the months, maintaining that cleanup, beginning things like stump removal, and then opening additional debris management sites as necessary. Again, you may need to get into conditions might change. Traffic patterns might get worse. An area may be there may be a re-entry in a specific area, and you want to be closer to that area. I can remember, and I know Lee Crowder's on the call here today out in Galveston County after Hurricane Ike, when Bolivar Peninsula finally became open again. Being able to have a site there to begin the debris removal operation was critical due to the geographic constraints and the speed at which the debris needed to be cleaned up.
Hey, John, and not might change, but the conditions will change, right? I mean, it is going to change. And at this point, I want to highlight too, specifically to your debris sites or even your landfill operations. You want to have really good operational plans for those sites. As the event goes on, you're probably going to deal with more regulatory inspections, FEMA or Army Corps of Engineers, TCEQ type people wanting to see your operation, to see the site. And another thing I'll mention is regarding operational plans is really fire suppression plans or having your contractor have a plan, an emergency plan in the event of a fire, because these sites, debris here, obviously you think of a grinding and mulching operation, mulch piles heat up. Some municipalities, especially in Houston, we have specific rules on mulch sites. Fire marshals type offices typically get involved. You may need their office to review a set of plans, and piles will heat up. I'll leave it at that. So having the capability to respond to a fire at one of these sites is very important.
Yeah, those conditions changing and having that flexibility, and then you as the debris manager in the local government, making sure you have a pulse on the operation. Again, daily meetings. We talk about those daily meetings with FEMA. I would also say daily meetings with those contractors, having them set at a certain time, and making sure that you understand what's going on. What do your reports look like? How many trucks do you have in the field? How much debris was picked up? I know that is a huge piece of getting out in front of potential issues that may occur. Again, we're going to talk about communication with residents in a little bit more detail. But again, when we talk timeline, that's when that starts to occur. Now, when it gets into the longer term recovery, maintaining your operation and things starting like leaners and hangers. And we're, again, what we would like to say is making sure that you start as quickly and as nicely as your debris operation can start, that you start your haul out and you start closing down the operation as soon as you can. But leaners and hangers and stumps, which is the one of those specialized programs, takes a tremendous amount of documentation. And again, you can see here some photographs that are required by FEMA when it comes to these special debris programs. And I just want to, and Ricardo's going to talk a little bit more about it, having been a part. He's also heck of a nice guy. He's also our data manager, our head data manager for all of our operations. So he gets to go through, gigabytes, or I don't know what is after terabytes of petabytes of data that are required by FEMA for these different operations. So Ricardo, what recommendations do you have here?
So for the leaner hanger program, usually these come after a wind-based event. So you would have a lot of uprooted trees or trees that have been knocked over or leaning to where they're a hazard to the public. So same with the limbs, the contractors would go out, and each crew, they can ramp up to almost about 80, 100 tickets a day. So each ticket is the damage is assessed with photos. So there's, like you see in the photos, there's measurement requirements. There's also the right of way. So the ticket, the tree would have to originate on the right of way and show the hazard to the public. So there's a lot of documentation that goes into this. And in certain areas, like for example in Louisiana, with very heavy forest areas, there was a large number of hangers and leaners that had to be assessed and cut down. So there's that eats up a lot of your resources there, as well as orchestrating. So you would have to keep in mind of where these cuts are going to be taking place. So if it's there on a busy street, obviously you got to start implementing possibly traffic control. And then at the same time, you're going to have a lot of residents that you got to keep in mind. So if they have trees that are there it's on their property, but still in the right of way, you might get some pushback from a few residents to say it could be an old tree that they've had on their property for a good while. So that's something to just keep in mind also. And it's just a very high volume, high images quality.
So let me ask you this, Ricardo. How much is one typical crew can do, because I'm dollars and cents. Okay. I'm trying to think this through because you said something. Each crew could do 80 tickets a day, and a ticket represents one tree.
Correct.
Okay. So each crew does 80 tickets. And what would you say an average cost per cut is, or average cost per ticket is?
Average cut. So say if you're cutting down a tree, these typically on a standard contract, it's based off of measurement size. So if you get a standard tree that's between maybe 12 to 18 inches in diameter, you're looking about $180 to $300 per tree. And
okay.
Then,
so 80 tickets times 180. So each crew's doing about $15,000, $14,400.
Right.
So maybe one of these cut crews that's taking out that Widowmaker right there that you see in the screen, maybe that's $75 a tree, like for a hanger.
the hanger's right, about $75.
$75 a tree, that's $6,000. So now how many? So we might have 30 crews. 30.
Right. So then you're looking at about 1,000 units each day.
1,000 tickets. So 1,000 tickets for a normal community. Doesn't have to be huge. I mean, it's not even, it's just like a Westlake,
Right,
Texas.
the cost can climb
So
very fast.
30,000 person community could have 1,000 tickets a day generated times 1,000 tickets times $75. So it's $75,000 a day for this specialized debris program, which is the reason why 3 photographs are needed.
Right, exactly. And
It is a
for that-
lot of information.
And for that exact reason, that's why you need all the documentation to verify, because the last thing you want to do is have all the work done, and at the end of the day, once you're trying to turn everything in for reimbursement, the last thing you want to do is have anything kicked out for either not being on the right of way or just lacking the proper documentation.
We would just highly recommend that you assign a really responsible operations manager or field supervisor that's solely focused on your leading tree, hazardous limb, whatever that type of program is. In addition, private property debris removal is a very a meticulous program. This one's a little bit of a slower moving train, whereas, leaning trees, hanging limbs, that's an avalanche. Okay, this one is more glacial, where it's moving a little bit slower. Again, a very documentation intensive program, a lot of environmental, historical requirements, but again, part of that specialized debris program. Now, when you get into the project completion, I can't stress making sure that you finish as well as you started. And I know, Nick, you've been a part of the shutting down of the debris operations, and that's been a challenge at times. You want to kind of talk about some of the best practices there?
Yeah. So number one, congrats. You kind of made it through the bulk of your process here, and you're looking at things are slowing down. You're focusing on wrapping this job up and closing out. As John said, I mean, spending a minute to make sure you've got all your key documents in place. At this point too, you're probably tracking things like damages that your contractor may have done out in your community and resident complaints, things like that. Folks who've been missed or people calling into your call center, hey, you missed me. I still have my debris. You never picked it up, even though they brought it out, 2 days ago. Things like that. And then, closing out the DMS sites that you set up. And I would say real quick here, at this point, you're going to want to be focusing on haul out and haul out of the debris that your contractor managed at the site, getting it to its final landfill or disposal location, and keeping that process moving.
Awesome. No, thank you so much. Because again, this project completion, debris operations, you don't want them down for a long time. I mean, you want to keep things moving. But a big piece of this is keeping the public involved. And the objective of that public information is to provide that information. Again, when people stop getting the information, that's when the talking starts. And we just try as much as possible. Everybody's had a disruption, and everybody's got an opinion, and they all stink. And the phrases and that sort of thing. But being able to provide information to the public and increase that transparency while still, managing expectations is a huge piece of this. So again, we recommend everything to keep road clearance, keeping information going. Hey, what streets are going to be passable? Which streets are not? Debris collection, those debris you've heard from Ricardo that you want to look at, you may want to tell them, hey, this is what these trucks are going to be picking up. We have a lot of people now have what they call Geoportals or GIS transparency into where these trucks are, the location, and what type of debris they're picking up. Maybe it's household hazardous waste. Maybe it's their vegetative debris. They're picking up just clean woody debris, but not all trucks are the same. But this one, providing instructions to debris separation, this is an actual document that's available by H-GAC. And I know, Brian, you've been a part of a lot of planning efforts associated with public information and kind of what are some of those best practices that you've talked to when you're planning for disaster and maybe how folks can do that?
Yeah, so I mean, you have a good opportunity before a disaster occurs to try to get those messages developed as much as you can. Of course, you have to keep them flexible for the event that occurs. But when an event happens, the media is going to be calling just constantly. It's going to be a barrage of calls. And then people are going to be calling their elected officials wanting information. When are you going to get this out of my, out of my yard? Or, a lot of complaints and questions will be coming pretty fast. And so providing this information is really important to get it out very quickly. You need to get the information, the instructions to the public out very quickly, because, some people, depending on, if it's a hurricane and people have kind of hunkered down, they're going to want to start pushing the stuff out really quickly. They want to try to get things back to normal as quickly as possible and start cleaning up. Or maybe they've been away and they come back home. So, I mean, it's a matter of, getting those instructions out very quickly to say, separate your debris. The whole idea is that some of this debris, like your vegetative debris, may go to one place. Maybe some of the construction demolition debris may go to another place. Your refrigerators and freezers may go someplace else. And so, trucks may come through and pick up one thing, or they may combine some things, but it's having, if it's all separated out and, easy for the contractors to come through and pick up, then it can make the whole process move much faster for the entire community. And having those messages ready to go to push out as quickly as possible will really help you to get that message out. So hopefully when people start cleaning their house up, they'll know to kind of segregate that debris so it'd be easy to pick up.
I mean, people will lose their dadgum mind after this. I mean, and being able to have that, the procedures, the canned messages, just the basic information. Don't bag your debris. Don't mix your household hazardous waste. Don't place it right on top of a fire hydrant, where that's the best place. I mean, they could have a whole yard open, but they're gonna put it right there on that utility box. Anyway, but that's a story for another day. But what I will say is putting the information out, you could tell them once, tell them what you told them, and tell them again. I had a professor that would hammer that home. And so that's what I continue to stress. Those every day, multiple passes are going to be needed. This is going to be a process. Don't worry, it's not just one time. We're here for you. How are you able to do that? And then communicating that final pass. Hey, this is the last time. And then, hey, this is the last time. All right, really, it's the last time. Now, I mean it this time.
And then, yes, I'm serious. No, really. No. Now it's the last time.
Absolutely. And that's what a lot of things happen. We're kind of tongue in cheek here, because the final pass oftentimes becomes a more of a final pass. And that's just part of the process. But giving people an option to haul their own debris is often a nice way to, put things into their own hands. And there's a lot of do's and don'ts. We've seen them work very successfully. And I know, Nick, you've been involved in a lot of these, and I know, Ricardo, you've been as well on these public drop-off sites. And what are some recommendations on how you've seen them used well and not so well?
Right. So for the public drop-off sites, for those that do not know, so these are typically kind of similar to DMS, or maybe even go alongside with the DMS, is you'll designate a location where the citizens can come and drop off their debris. So you would, depending on the site, you would establish what is going to be allowed to be dropped off at these sites. So typically, the resident will show up. You would have personnel on site that would verify, one, that they're just a public citizen. They're not a debris contractor. You come across that a lot. You have some localized, kind of like mom and pop debris contractors that will show up, try and get their debris disposed of for free. So obviously that's not allowed. So there's a stop measure there to make sure that anybody dropping off debris is actually a resident. And then at the same time, the debris that they are dropping off has to be, one, allowed based off the site. And typically you all establish the hours as well. So typically on our sites, they're usually up and running 7 days a week. But on a specific time frame that's open based on your monitoring capabilities. And really there really hasn't been too much there's not too much pushback. Besides that, it's just you kind of want to make sure it's established and open to the public. That way they know. That way they're not running around to different sites. And that's really the only issues we've had is where maybe some residents, they've been misinterpreted of what's allowed. So they're having to try and drive around in different sites and.
Yeah, putting that messaging. And I know, Nick,
Yeah, we've used
locally
these
as well.
We've used these successfully in the past for many events, really big ones like Harvey and small ones like the Winter Storm Uri. So, you know, in some departments or divisions of the county, we had one commissioner, he likes to call them the self-help site. And so it was at their precinct camp, and that's what it was, a self-help site. Bring your debris to this location, dispose of it. I would emphasize two things. Number one is what Ricardo said about ineligible debris coming to that site, especially contractor debris, because you're going to see a lot of people try to sneak, you know, stuff that they were paid to dispose of to that site. The second thing is to reemphasize that these sites need similar permitting and setup like your DMS site.
I'll tell you, I like that idea of self-help site. I mean, that clear, that's a great message to tell people. I mean, that's a way to even, you know, avoid confusion, that it's open for contractors. Self-help. Everybody knows self-help. There's a whole section at Barnes & Noble called self-help. So people understand that term. On this one, as far as realistic expectations of debris operations, again, from a public information perspective, continuing to message, it's going to take weeks. This is a process. It's a month. You know, it may take months, and making sure that everybody knows everybody's going to be serviced. We're going to have, you know, again, equity and be inclusive with that process to make sure that there is no, you know, one area that is getting left out of the, you know, the possibility of your debris operation. When it comes to messaging, again, that consistency, a lot of people have public information officers, or at least there's some training in that. Again, I think there's some great YouTubes out there, or ways to get training on that, to just get that consistent message out there. Again, Google is a great way to find messaging from places like Baton Rouge, or East Baton Rouge Parish, places in Florida, heck, a ton of different places in Texas, who have been very, very good about getting that message out. And not only getting the message out, its ability to take messages in, and using call centers. We've seen that used here locally. We've also seen them used in some of these other locations, like in Southwest Louisiana. But having that call center that's available and a dedicated line for debris operations, you know, 1-800 pickup or whatever it is. And again, call centers could be used for coordinating volunteer groups and understanding where the debris is. It can give residents an opportunity. I tell you what, I still like talking to somebody on the other line. I don't care if they're in Denver, Colorado, or if they're in, you know, Punxsutawney, Philadelphia, or Pennsylvania, or they're overseas. I would prefer to talk to somebody versus pressing 8 to listen to some pre-recorded message. And
yeah, as far as I know, we have not outsourced debris call in, you know,
that's right.
messaging internationally yet.
I know. I think it's all domestic, but again, you can give them training, but have a facility, have the staff, and have the training. And I know, Ricardo, you operated a couple of these call centers. You know, what are some recommendations that you can provide if one is going to try to set one of these up?
Right. So for the call center, one of the main keys is make sure they have the voicemail set up and functioning, even especially if they get full, because you're gonna have calls at off hours where people are not manning the lines. But besides that, just making sure that whoever is talking to anybody that's calling into the site, they let them know what's going on, what's being allowed for pickup, where they can take things for disposal. John mentioned also the volunteers is a huge asset. We had recently in the Kentucky tornadoes from last December, they had a large volunteer group. So like with the debris operations, the only things that can get picked up is what's put out to the right of way. So a lot of times you'll have older residents or people that are not capable of moving the debris themselves. So that's where these volunteers would come in very handy, and just kind of being that buffer, because a lot of people are upset when these hurricanes come, or any natural disaster. It's very stressful for anybody that goes through it. So just making sure you have people that are compassionate and just aware of what's going on, and that way they can let the public know everything that they need.
It's really important to have a pre-scripted message and folks who can take some sort of training so that they are compassionate, that they, a lot of times it's just somebody to complain to. I mean, and it's much better to complain to a call center person than a commissioner's office or a city council member's office, and making sure that they have a way to document it. Again, this could be, you could manage this via, something as easy as an Excel spreadsheet, or through an email system. You could use a tool like an online tool like Smartsheet. I mean, anything out there, it's a way to document these calls and document their complaint and know that they are being heard. Because again, there's a ton of stress, not only on the resident, but the call takers themselves. Stress is a part of this. So consider doing things in shifts, but also have that voicemail set up and empty that voicemail so that people can at least, again, leave a message and call them back. But what we have found is diverting your debris calls from the rest of your calls, like the questions about housing conditions or individual assistance or small business administration. That really allows a more streamlined process. So again, some of the requirements and considerations, you could do 24/7 or business hours, understanding, is there an FAQ document or specific scripting, getting that number out to places like Red Cross and United Way, and having them, and potentially you want them to be able to provide other information out there. And so, again, it's a great way to diffuse a lot of situations before they get elevated to your elected leadership, which again, I think it's a CTF is the acronym we use, control the flow. Controlling the flow of information to elected leadership is often a great way to manage expectations. There's some situations like down in Victoria County, the county commissioner that was down there, he was the debris manager. He was an elected official that rolled his sleeves up and got involved each and every day. Commissioner Clara Beckett, who was in Bastrop County. All right, Commissioner Beckett, oh man, she was so passionate and she was involved in operations every day. So she was there and she really loved the day in, day out operations. There's some people like it, some people don't like it, but again, keeping them involved and understanding how much or little they want to have and providing them with messaging sure could be, a great way to get things done. When it comes to planning the content of that message, again, I know, Brian, you've been a part of a lot of that messaging and developing these messages as incident action planner out in California, or on planning process. But there's some things that content of the message that you would recommend us people focus on.
Yes. So, of course, expressing empathy to those folks, kind of getting down to where they're, what they're feeling and understanding their issues that they're dealing with and being empathic with that. The other thing is providing relevant, helpful information. What's happened? What are we doing? I used to have the public information role when I worked for the state of Texas. And so, one thing I always learned is what's happened? What are we doing about it? What can you do about it? Let's kind of boil it down to those three main things. And because people need to know, they need instructions, they want to do something in a situation like that. So giving them clear instructions on what to do, using plain language, try to avoid the jargon, the acronyms, and all those other things we use every day. Avoid cliches, things like, well, it is what it is. It's not going to be real helpful in a disaster, or, leave no stone unturned, those kind of things, unless you actually do want them to overturn stones in the yard for some reason, I don't know. But, the whole idea is, don't use those cliches that won't be helpful in an emergency. Stick to plain language and the instructions that they need to get their debris out there and respond appropriately. So you want to get them to act, to do what they need to do, show the respect to them, and then promote collaboration. you know, we're all in this together. We have to work together to speed the recovery of the community and getting them to recognize that and take those actions and work together to make it happen.
So Brian, what were you saying? You're saying what the problem is, what we're doing, and what they can do to solve it. Is that that's the three things? I think that's a great way to plan this content, because I mean, if you can boil it down, I do everything in three, because I've read somewhere, blog, podcast, you know, people can only understand three things at one time. I think those are the three things that I'd want to make sure we're hearing. You know, again, plain language, this is my favorite one. I don't know if y'all have seen this before, but taco watch and taco warning. I have spent years in this business not understanding the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning until I saw the taco example. I use it with my kids. I use it with my coworkers. But again, this is the type of, you know, I got a plain language. I mean, it gets people engaged. You know, this is on the web. I belong to a Facebook group, Texas Emergency Managers. They always putting silly stuff on there, but this is the one I really like. Watch versus warning, but with tacos. So that one I thought was cute there. The watch is that the ingredients are available, and the warning is the ingredients are there in the taco, and that taco may end up on your plate at any time. So I thought that was always good. Disseminating the message. I mean, listen, this is a lot more. There's just so many more ways to get out this message than just the newspaper back in 2008 and 2005. And you're dealing with all the different mediums out there. You know, again, you showing the City of League City's Facebook page, you know, Twitter and Instagram. You know, again, we've seen people start to use TikToks to push that information out. You know, the next doors of the world. Sorry. Whoops. And hey, listen, that's where people, this is the data out there. This is where people get the information. It's not just print publications, although my dad still gets the paper every day. He's 82 years old. He loves the paper in his hands. I still love the paper in my hands, but I am taking my information in on a smartphone or tablet, and really not much in television, radio, but that's just me. You know, again, you have to be aware of this, and you know, again, another statistic there as far as how are they likely to get those news websites or apps via the Google search, getting the Google and social media. So that's huge. Not so much on podcasts, but again, to be aware of this when you're getting the debris out. But social media can be such a valuable tool and a quick and easy way to communicate messaging. You know, we've seen YouTube. Actually, H-GAC, another plug for H-GAC, has a great video, short and long video about how to separate debris. I think it's extremely relevant and can be a great resource if you want to just post something. Again, very it was designed to have the largest community use it as well as the smallest community that could use it. And it's developed in a way in both English and Spanish to communicate the instructions about how to get debris. So social media, a lot on using it for weather updates. You know, again, traffic for any road closures that may be occurring due to debris operations. And then social media concerns and complaints and the rapid spread of publications. I know it's been used quite a bit. I mean, Ricardo, in some of the operations, you know, I've seen them used. I mean, has that been your experience there as well? And how social media can you can get some information back to you?
Right. So with social media, obviously you can target specific demographics. So, for example, certain people is obviously a huge factor. So just kind of getting everything out there in different platforms is very important. So just keep in mind you want to utilize the internet as well as any printed sources for just like I mentioned the different demographics. So each project I've come across, they'll have their own Facebook page, and the new ones, like kind of like next door. That way you can kind of let them know where they're going to be and what all needs to be done.
Yeah, it's again, great way to just get the conversation going. Getting the debris strategy out there and understanding. Hey, listen, you're going to have your trolls out there. I think that's the common term for those folks that are just not very nice on social media. But you're going to get a lot of good information as well as not so good information. I mean, Nick, I know that's been a part of your experience there within the county and something you've used in the past.
Yeah, one thing I would mention is as all these tools, become more available and advanced really in messaging your community. I've seen it both ways. The best thing is to take a good operational plan from you or your contractor and help disseminate that to the public. It's much easier to be generic. Let's say we're going to be in your area or in your neighborhood area about X date, next week, something like that. I've seen PIO people want to get real detailed on, no, we need to tell Miss Jones exactly what date we're going to be at her house. And that is just, number one, challenging. Number two, you set yourself up for failure. So again, broad messaging like John is talking about, things that can go to various sources, much easier to manage.
When you again get your debris management team, and we're going to talk about some of the planning activities with Brian here, but keeping your public information tasks focused with an individual will be extremely helpful come disaster time. And I know, Brian, you've been a part of those you mentioned public information officer. These are, again, we're talking about some of the recovery tasks. I know you've been a part of that as well. I mean, any recommendations as far as that during the planning phase and preparing for disaster debris events?
Yeah, so it's being partners with all the other communities that might be affected. So coordinate planning with them so that you're all on the same page. If you have a joint information system set up, so you're all kind of communicating the same thing, a clear message that goes out to everyone. Making sure you have a system in place to coordinate the communications with even the elected officials. Like what I used to do is before I'd send a message out to the media, I'd first send it out to all the partners. So everyone knew what was going to be said, send out to the elected leaders so they knew what was going to be going out before it went out. Give them maybe some points that they can use to their constituents before the message goes out. Coordinating, being partners with all these folks in public information messaging can make things go a lot smoother, and they won't be as angry at you when you send out a surprise message that they don't know anything about. Their constituents are calling saying, hey, what's this I just got? What does this mean to me? So just make sure everyone's on the same page with those messages, and then practicing them occasionally with an exercise or a drill to make sure that everyone's on board and can actually get those messages out. Maybe even having a site on your website, we call it like a dark site, where you have the messages kind of up and ready to go, that all IT has to do is push a button and shoot the information out, make a few tweaks and send it out. So having all those things at the ready can really help your public information messaging go smoother.
I think that's great what you mentioned about the collaboration with the other nearby cities of the county. I mean, I know in Kentucky, in Bowling Green, as well as Warren County, for a joint operation. I know that there's places like Dickinson, League City, Webster, all those areas. I mean, you can't really tell where one city ends and one begins. I know, and so a lot of times having that coordination, especially in public information, is important. So again, when you're setting up your plan, make sure that your PIO, public information officer, understands their responsibilities. So they may be asked to set up a call center, provide safety messaging, correcting any misinformation. In the recovery phase, providing a status of debris operation, monitoring these social media posts, correcting misinformation, thanking the residents for their help, preparing and participating in any debriefing, as well as identifying any lessons learned that may be necessary. Now, before we move on to pre-position contract, we've been talking for just over an hour. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a 10-minute break to stretch your legs. For those of you bio breaks, online, thank you very much. We're going to take a short 10-minute break. The official H-GAC clock here is at the 8, which is at 9:40. We're going to come back at 9:50, and we'll continue on with pre-position contracts and getting into some of the other aspects of debris management. Thanks, everybody, for your attendance, and hang tight.
chat,
I
guess
do.
is the best way.
Yeah.
Okay.
East Texas cog.
So, okay, yeah, so. All right, Lake Jackson.
Deer Park.
Deer Park,
Okay. There.
Harris County.
All right.
Alton.
Private sector.
I don't know where-
Alton.
Freeport Chambers, Salinas. We had 2 people from Salinas. Oh, no, Panitas, I mean.
Where's that?
Panitas. I don't know. That's his last name. Panitas is the one.
Wait. His name is Leroy Salinas.
And he's from Panitas.
And I'm excited that, we are able to have a in-person and a virtual audience. It was really neat to take a look at where everybody's from and who everybody's out there. I mean, Mike Stump and Alex Coffey, Mr. Cole, good to see you on there. And Tom Warner, fantastic. A lot of folks and a lot of friendly faces and names that I've had a chance to work with in the past. And then some people from all over the state of Texas, Alamo area COG, the East Texas Council of Governments, West Central Texas Council of Governments are joining us, and Brazos Valley. We also have folks in here with Texas State University and North Central Texas region up in Irving. So welcome, Alton and Panitas. That's fantastic, as well as Burleson and Frisco, just to name a few. So excited to have you a part of this presentation today. We're going to go ahead and get started with the pre-position contracts. One more thing before I get into this, Aaron Livingston has asked me, and I ask you, if you do have questions, please take a moment to drop them in the chat. It doesn't take long. Aaron will flag me down, or if you are here in person, please raise your hand. We'll come grab you. Phil Donahue himself, Brian Rutherford will come and give you the mic, and we can have some dialogue and some conversation. So I get very, very pleased to have you here. So now getting into pre-position contracts. And again, when it comes to disasters, having those contracted resources available to you, we've seen a tremendous amount of value, especially when it comes to these large, significant events. These trucks and resources come to the disaster area from all over the nation, and really are the best assets. They're made for this type of work, and it is extremely valuable. So these pre-negotiated contracts can save a lot of time and money in a disaster. You can potentially get better rates than you would at the time of emergency, and you have a vehicle in place where contractors may not be as willing to respond if you are looking to buy or retain a contractor after event, because they don't want to take on any new business. We've seen that a lot in those big events, such as a Hurricane Harvey, where a few communities were in that situation. So I know, before we move on, I know, Nick, you've been involved in putting these pre-positioned contracts out. Just in general, any do's, don'ts, things that you might want to recommend, especially for those, maybe not, in another area of Texas that hasn't had the experiences that we've had down here in the Houston-Galveston area.
Yeah, certainly. Well, the first thing is I would highly recommend a pre-positioned contract for the reasons John said. I mean, the biggest reason is you have something in place when you need it. The second part is there's nothing wrong with, having multiple vendors on hand. You could have you could award a primary vendor, secondary vendor, even a tertiary vendor. So you've got three that if something happens to one, you've got some other options. And the third thing I think I'd say is you can do some research, talk to your other local municipalities and see what types of things are in their contract. You may want to specify a certain type of operation or have some specific requirements. So go for that. And lastly, I mean, just make sure your contract and your purchasing mechanism is FEMA compliant.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of minefields out there. However, there's a lot more resources that are available now versus what you had in previous chapters. Now, you have the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team, or H-GAC, which is a part of FEMA. You want to write that down, FEMA, Procurement Disaster Assistance. Sorry. Hello? Maybe now, maybe I should turn it on. Sorry. The FEMA and the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team, I'll say there's a ton of minefields out there, and there are a ton of different resources available that local governments can utilize. There's a ton of local examples. There's no shortage of sample contracts, sample procurements out there, both domestically here and outside the state of Texas. All you have to do is collect disaster debris hauling or debris monitoring RFP nationally. I would argue there's probably 100 debris pre-positioned contracts nationwide that are issued every single year. Maybe closer to 150. That's a statistic. I like statistics. I like numbers. Something you can count. So to say that I don't know. I don't have a template. I don't have a go by. That dog don't hunt, because there's information out there. You can easily find it on Google, or if you all subscribe to the bid nets or the find RFPs, if your community does that, just talk to your purchasing agent and you can find some things out there. There are certainly some minefields that we want to talk about. I just saw that Valerie Blanton is on, and Valerie is a name that you all should also write down as the Texas Division of Emergency Management's head debris czar, the queen of debris, if you will. Valerie is a tremendous amount of experience and is always out there to provide great information to local government. So thank you for being on, Valerie. But providing full and open competition to every vendor that may be interested is really of paramount importance. Next is conducting and assuring that there are the affirmative steps to include minority, women, small business enterprises, or labor surplus firms when available. That is pulled right out of the procurement manual, and making sure that is a part and parcel to your procurement. Excluding contractors that are drafting specifications or requirements or statements of work to avoid a conflict of interest, and then maintaining those written standards of conducting governing employees, the conduct of governing employees, and who are engaging in selection and award, making sure there's no, quote unquote, brother-in-law deals out there. Although my brother-in-law is great, I don't make deals with him, and again, we encourage that as well. Some other ones: maintaining records. The rationale for procurement, your cost basis, your ICE, which is an acronym called Independent Cost Estimate, that's out there. Your contractor selection or rejection, and your type of contract out there. In addition, there are exclusions that are in there that may be impactful, such as pulling and contracting from a single source. The public exigent or emergent circumstance, which may or may not, in place. That's exigency and emergent circumstance is something, again, you can read about. It could potentially impact your ability to speed up the process. There's also, issues of non-competitive procurements. But again, in all these situations, there are challenges related to procurements, and especially on the way to procure these contracts. Ricardo, I'm going to ask you to step in here to talk about the compensation mechanisms that are in place and the ones that you've seen well, not so well, and what you would recommend for local governments to use.
Right. So
Here, come
for
here, step. They can see you on the camera. He's a good looking dude here.
for your contract, you want to keep in mind that there's with the minefields that John had mentioned before, there's specific line items that can be added into a contractor's RFP or their proposal. And it might sound good to you at the time once you're reviewing everything. But then you keep in mind that even though you might need that service done, you might have a hard time getting that reimbursed down the line whenever once the project's wrapped. For example, say mobilization costs, that might be a huge factor for a lot of debris contractors that they'll add into the proposal. But you got to keep in mind how that will affect your reimbursement come the end of the project, as well as specific line items. For example, say they had down trees as a specific line item, you might have a hard time getting that reimbursed through FEMA compared to a standard, like we had mentioned before with the tree removal program. So things like that with as well as time materials. A lot of contracts would prefer time materials, but then at the same time on the cost reimbursement side, if you have a full project full of just time material costs, you're gonna have a hard time getting that reimbursed, or even convincing that everything's being done properly and efficiently.
So
Absolutely.
just
Go
to
ahead.
add, most of what you're saying is, the bulk of your debris contract is going to be like unit rate based for debris pickup. Outside of, you may have some labor and hourly rates for that push period, the first 72 hours. But some other things to think about are, in your contract. So you may have rates for right-of-way debris pickup of vegetation from your right-of-way, and where's it go after that? Who's paying for the landfill costs or the tipping fees? Is that a pass-through, or is that, pass through to the municipality, you guys, or is it a contractor having to pay that cost and it's included in your rate item? So things like that. I've seen some other contracts that do mileage and tipping fee reimbursement, things like that. Good things to consider.
I think it's understanding that you're not going to catch every piece of the, everything's going to cost something after a disaster, especially debris. But you want to try to think ahead, try to understand, what is out there and what you might have to pay for. But when you get into that contract, the county, the city, whoever you are. I just saw a gentleman from the city of Donna down in South Texas. When you do have these contracts in place, make sure that the provisions are included in all your contracts and that you have the appropriate oversight so that the provisions are in place and that contract is being managed and monitored. In addition, there are your standard provisions. These are on the FEMA website. You could just take that mouse, you could click them all, copy them, paste them over, and it's required. There's no, if you do have a contract and they're not in there, you can amend your contract to include them in there. We've seen that done a number of different times. So that's not the end of the world if these are not in there. So it's something for you all to think about and take a look at. Double check, are all of these provisions in there? Equal opportunity, anti-kickback, Davis-Bacon, all those things, are they in the contract that you have for debris operations? Now, moving on from procurement and some contracting provisions, we're going to turn over to Brian, talk a little bit of health and safety. They don't let me talk about health and safety. I am the anti-health and safety officer for Tetra Tech. But Brian, you want to talk about health and safety?
Certainly. So make sure I'm on here. Yeah, so debris operations can be inherently dangerous because people are working in a disaster situation. And of course, there's a lot of debris around that they're having to maneuver and trying to clean up. And so, you really want to keep, of course, you want to keep your staff safe, as well as the general public that may be living around where all this debris is. And so, one of the things is developing a health and safety plan, and OSHA requires a health and safety plan. That's where you have this detailed plan that indicates, who's going to be in control of this project, the roles and responsibilities of different people who are going to be involved in it. What are the hazards that these people are going to be subject to? If it's during, if it's a hurricane, of course, it may be the debris, puncture wounds or the heat, those kind of things, and having a system in place for dealing with those. Controls in place to make sure people are safe. What to do if there is an emergency. So looking at, where's, what are they going to do? Who do they report to? Where can they go? It's looking at what are those emergency facilities that are close by. So all of those are elements that are part of that health and safety plan. We have that chart there on the hierarchy of controls. And so ideally, you want to try to eliminate the hazard if you can. What kind of mitigation measures can you take to just remove the hazard altogether? Some cases we can't do that. So then you look at substitution. Can we substitute something? Kind of like we did during COVID. Okay, people don't have to work at their office. They can work remotely. So what are some things you can do to substitute so they're away from that the hazard? Another is engineering controls. So you can kind of think of those are some systems you put in place to separate people from the hazard. So maybe fencing, around a debris management site so the public or children maybe at a school can't wander into the site where they have the heavy equipment working. And then there's administrative controls where, you're looking at, what are the different operations taking place? What are the procedures and how can we make those safer? So just looking at ways to make it safer, whether it's working with heavy equipment, make sure people are trained or those kind of things to affect it. And then finally, the last thing is personal protective equipment. That's kind of like your last line of defense. And so, of course, you want to make sure people have, if you can't do all those other things, then at least make sure people have the personal protective equipment that they need.
Hey, Brian, I'd like to ask Ricardo, because he's Mr. War Stories out here when it comes to health and safety. And I just think about when I was taking driver's ed a long time ago, then they showed me the Jaws of Death or whatever it was. They'd show me those movies about, the worst car crashes out there. And that got my attention. So, Ricardo, what are some of the things out there that, really and truly, what has happened and what can happen on these debris sites as we talk about health and safety?
Right. So for the debris sites, like we mentioned before, a lot of these temporary sites will be utilized at parks. So, for example, we had during Hurricane Matthew back in 2016, we had a number of parks that would be utilized for the DMSs, and so it's like Brian mentioned, the kind of like blocking them off properly, maybe even stationing monitors at certain entrances to keep the public from venturing into these locations, because if they're reducing the debris, you have grinders running. Sometimes you can get projectiles. We had one situation where I was up even in a tower one time, and you had like a large stump that got clogged in the grinder and just shot it out about 50 yards at about 100 miles an hour. So just keeping that in mind, as well as on the road. So if they're doing the debris collection, you have monitors parked on the side of the road. You have the trucks parked there too. So just keeping everybody in safe distances. Obviously, utilizing the PPE is a huge factor. Even on on DOT projects, you're dealing with roads that vehicles are traveling at high speed. So just kind of keeping them out of the danger as much as you can.
I think what he's trying to tell you is that we've had situations where there's been a small child that's wandered into the park and has gotten hurt. We don't want to have that situation or heard about that. Or if we're working on the right of way and there's a car that barrels in and hurts somebody and they get hit by a car. Health and safety is the number one thing out there for us. And again, when you work with your contractor or you work with your crews, to make sure that that is top of mind as well.
Yeah, so I mentioned the all hazard analysis, making sure you, and I've been involved in some of these where you kind of pick apart a particular function and look at all the different aspects and what has to be done and how can you make it safer. And so, looking at all those different steps like we've talked about, is part of the response and recovery aspect, the truck certification, debris collection, all those different aspects, looking at those and breaking it down, going, okay, who's going to be doing this? Are they trained? What kind of training is needed? How can we make it safer? Can it be made safer? So looking at all those different things and making sure you have adequate controls in place and personal protective equipment to protect people that might be doing that work. Training, of course, is very important. Making sure that people are trained to the job and only those people who are trained to the job do that job. A person may have, may want to have always wanted to try working on a bulldozer, but if they're not, haven't. Okay, John's not allowed to work on a bulldozer, so it's just making sure only those people who have been trained that do work on that type of equipment. Making sure everything is, and people acknowledge the training that they're supposed to have. And then at every job site and every project, we always do daily safety briefs at the start of the day. And so you're looking at, okay, what's the weather going to be like today? How do you need to dress to be prepared for that? You need to be dressed in layers and be warm, or make sure you have your safety vest so you're visible. If there were any incidents that occurred, kind of breaking those down, talking about the next day, not beating someone over the head necessarily, but saying, okay, this happened yesterday, and, what can we do to prevent this from happening? We don't want anyone else getting hurt. Even if it's, one of those sales that, almost happened, but didn't, making sure you kind of talk through those different events to make sure that people know what happened and we can learn from those. Driving safety. Driving is always a spot where you can have accidents, and that's one of the areas where we have one of our bigger problems is in safety is in driving. So making sure people follow safe driving tips, and then just general tips for avoiding incidents. So, and then field supervision is really important. Make sure someone is out there watching people and making sure people abide by the rules. And then make sure everything is documented. So if you do any training, make sure you document it. Make sure people sign off on the training. If it's not documented as far as OSHA is concerned, it didn't occur at all. Policies and procedures. So make sure there's a chain of command so people know if something does happen, how it gets reported, what they need to do, where they need to go. If they do get ill or they get injured, what they have to do to come back to work. Make sure there's a release to return. There's a policy for that. Illness protocols, of course, that's a big thing during COVID. If you're sick, don't come to work. Just let someone know. And then make sure that there's a procedure in place for coming back to work, to signing back on. And then the motor vehicle incident policy, make sure that's documented, everyone signs off. And then drug and alcohol policy. So, are you going to do drug testing? And, what's involved in that? Who are you going to use? So if you have an after incident drug policy, making sure that's very well documented and make sure people are aware of it. Hopefully that will prevent people from taking any drugs or alcohol while on the job.
But tacos are okay.
Tacos are good.
We got a taco theme here today. One of the things I just saw, Brian, if I could just interrupt for 1 second, we had some questions about whether or not this presentation was going to be made available after, and the answer is yes. The presentation is going to be available through H-GAC. Aaron has confirmed, so no worries there. And so, yeah, we're gonna, but thank you for the question, Kathy. We will try to answer them as quickly as we can in the order that they are received.
Yes. This is Cinco de Mayo, so yes, there is a taco theme that runs throughout this.
I left the chiclets and the pan dulce at home today, so sorry about that.
Okay, so field supervision. So you make sure you're aware of what the potential hazards are, be on the lookout, make sure training is provided to staff, and only those trained staff are out there working. Enforce safe work practices. So this is one thing that, again, have had experience in this area where sometimes people will kind of push to see how far they can get away with. But once you, and start enforcing the policy and people see that, the rest of them will kind of fall in line. So it's really, there's a place for negative reinforcement in these things. So make sure that you're out there and people see that you're out there and enforcing the policies. Providing personal protective equipment and making sure that people are wearing it and using it appropriately. Only allowing those staff with the proper training to operate equipment. I've mentioned that a couple of times. So that's really important. Traffic controls, make sure people that are obeying the speed limits and work with law enforcement to make sure people are aware of where the issues are and that there's systems in place to follow up if there's any traffic incidents or accidents. Watch for signs of fatigue. So one of the things we've learned too with all these different activations is that a lot of times people get really tired. They'll start to make mistakes. And then when people make mistakes, sometimes they either end up hurting themselves or other people. So it's making sure people don't get too fatigued, make sure they have breaks, and that they don't get too tired and injure themselves or someone else. So some lessons learned, go beyond the policies to what to do if. So, you tell people, okay, wear your, wear the safety helmet, but go beyond that to say, okay, if it's lost or if it gets damaged, where can you get another one? So, if you lose your safety vest, where can you find another one? So provide additional information. The motor vehicle incidents, of course, distracted driving with the cell phones and everything we have now, it can be a real problem. So, that's where we see the most incidents is distracted driving. So just making sure people are aware that they need to be watching the road, not worrying about answering their phone while they're driving. Just some other things listed there is adjusting speed for weather. Don't follow too closely. Make sure that you're alert and ready to make that drive. Typically, debris operations run from sunup to sundown. So it's a really long day. So making sure people are alert to be able to make that drive. And then wildlife. We've had some incidents with wildlife running out in front of cars and people hitting it. So just drive slow and watch out for that. Stay out of the work zone. So if you don't need to be in a place where heavy equipment is, don't be there. Make sure the public stays out of those places. And also look for trip and fall hazards and try to remove those so there's no incident there. Again, strong field supervision is key.
All right, no, thanks, Brian. I know we got, in this one, when it comes to planning, I think planning is going to be critical in having you as a local government, or if they're representing a council of governments, being able to disseminate some of this information. But planning, debris management plans, as I mentioned, Brian is the grand poobah of debris management planning, having been a part of so many complex, like the Los Angeles County debris management plan, where we had 88 jurisdictions as a part of that plan, and bringing them all together, disseminating that information, huge undertaking. But certainly there's some values as well as some simple information that you can include in that plan as you prepare for hurricane, tornado, wildfire, what am I missing? Locust season, or what have you. Brian, you want to take it over?
Yeah, sure. So, on the planning side, again, the one really important aspect is establishing clear roles and responsibilities. You want to make sure you know who's going to be doing what. within your jurisdiction. So there's no disagreements about who's supposed to be doing what, because you want to make sure that if something does happen, you can hit the ground running and run like a finely oiled machine when the incident occurs. So establishing those clear roles and responsibilities is really important. Also indicating, your partner agencies and what are they going to be doing? Army Corps of Engineers will often show up. What are they there for? What are they going to be doing? So, so indicating those roles as well. So, when these other agencies come in, like TCEQ or others, what would they be doing? What's their function? The other thing is you can do is identify the resources. So, making sure you have all of the your contracts that you have in place, have those recorded, and who are those people, who are the contacts for those contracts in place. If you do have to call upon them, you have that information at hand and can quickly put those things into motion. The debris management sites, we've talked quite a bit about that, but indicating those sites and having clear plans on how where debris will be dropped on those sites, where those sites are, what equipment that you might have that could be put to use if you have like a hurricane blow through. I mentioned before that if you have a hurricane blow through, the clearing roads is job one, making sure those roads are clear. So what equipment do you have on hand and what departments have that equipment so you can put that into use? So Parks, Parks has equipment. Public Works usually has a lot of equipment. Maybe Utilities has equipment. So, what are all those that you can put into use and put out there right away? Personnel, making sure you have personnel information, who they are, who's got responsibilities. Also worked in Galveston County for several years. And one of the things that always seemed to happen is disasters always occurred or something always blew up or something happened is always right at 4:30 and we were getting ready to go, or it's on the weekend or at night. And it's then you're trying to get a hold of people and how are you going to, who do you need to call? And so, having that information on hand and then, having names of people, because you're calling people and you're asking for them by name, try to get hold of them. So having all that in your plan can really help out. I've been one of those guys who sat in the EOC trying to get hold of people and resources, and having all that in one place can be really valuable. Recycling options, transfer stations, landfill sites. So once we talked a lot about picking all this stuff up, where's it going to go? What are you going to do with it? So having some idea of where you're going to take it, where, are there some recycling options in your area? We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but are there some good recycling options where you can get rid of some of this stuff so you're not plugging up the landfill? So listing all that and partnering with those resources. So partnering with the landfills, the recycling companies. So that way, when something does happen, you already kind of know what you have available to you.
Hey, Brian, just real quick, want to mention, so on recycling, a lot of the white goods get recycled. In fact, I can recall in Hurricane Harvey here in Houston, most of our white goods just disappeared off the streets. I mean, people would come by and just grab them. Now, the ones they wouldn't grab would be the freezers that weren't emptied and had been sitting out there for a month, right? That's the one you don't want to manage. But just want to mention that. And so, a lot of that stuff, it's all going to recycler, or the ones that, your contractor is going to pick up are going to be properly handled and typically taken to a recycling facility as well. So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, the white goods is really a nasty job. People get back home after being gone for 2 weeks or however long, and they get home and they open that freezer like, oh no, and they just close it and tape it up and push it out to the street. And so, yeah, it can get pretty bad. The other thing is providing debris estimates to aid in planning. So one of the things I get to do is go to these different communities and try to figure out, okay, what are your hazards? What type of debris might you be looking at? How much debris might you be looking at, depending on if it's a In this area, we look at hurricanes and, some other areas are they're really concerned about earthquakes. Other areas are worried about tornadoes. So what kind of debris are we looking at from that? And so I remember Jack Colley used to always say, how bad is bad? So, looking at those debris estimates give you an idea of how bad is bad going to be if it happens. So you have an idea of how many debris management sites you're going to need, how many trucks you might need to put out on the roads if it does happen. Identifying your priorities and strategies for debris clearing and collection. So, we've talked about the road clearance and having those priority roads established in your plan. Where are those roads? What are those roads? And are there particular facilities you want to make sure that you can have access to? Also, kind of laying out, like we did earlier, the different response strategies, so you have a clear path for moving forward and doing your debris operation. The other thing is there's a lot of regulations involved in this, a lot of public assistance guidelines and rules that have to be followed. You can't rely on common sense with this stuff. If you do, you're really gonna mess up. You really have to follow the guidelines, follow the rules, follow that the public assistance guidelines book so you can stay within those guidelines to get the full reimbursement that your jurisdiction is entitled to. Public information strategies, we've kind of talked that enough, but just important to remember is that failure to follow federal guidance and regulations can result in not being reimbursed. So very important to do the planning work ahead of time if you can, and make sure you get all your full reimbursement that's available.
I think, Brian, when it comes to the debris management planning process, what we've seen is bringing everybody together to acknowledge the challenges that you might face, and bringing the legal team in here, or the public information officer, or just your public works and engineering, or your solid waste management operations, as well as your private sector partners, can be so critical and so beneficial to just do it beforehand. I mean, the last thing that you want to do is meet that team that you're going to be relying on the day that it happens. I actually was just in California yesterday in San Diego, and the director of their emergency manager, that was his number one thing. He said, I don't want to be meeting you the day the disaster hits. And so again, one thing to take away, obviously procurement is going to be a big one. It's meeting the people where they are, meeting the people, again, your team. And then, a third thing, I think, and it just kind of flows right in here, is integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion in your debris operation, debris management plan, and everything that you're involved in here. So we talk about diversity here. It's the presence that your race, your gender, your religion, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality, socioeconomic perspective, language, disability, age, religious commitment, or political perspective. There is a presence here. And again, when this was first brought up, and it continues to be brought up, it is truly important. I think it's been a part of how debris operations have occurred, but acknowledging this and acknowledging the diversity, especially when it comes to language barriers, or again, there was a one area of the city of Houston that is a certain faith, Jewish faith, and it was that they walked everywhere, and there was an area that was flooded after Hurricane Harvey, and they walked to the synagogue. They had to be in that area, understanding their faith and their community, and how it impacted things like debris, and them setting out the debris and some of the health and safety challenges because they were walking. Again, some things to consider: equity, promoting justice, impartiality, fairness, with the procedures, processes, and distribution of resources by you as local governments or contracted assets. And then finally, so in equity here, we talk about Deanna Criswell, who's the FEMA administrator. They were talking about turning the page at FEMA and infusing throughout the agency, the programs, policies to serve the people, those disaster survivors who face unique barriers before, during, and after disasters. You look at some of the statistics related to COVID and how it impacts, or how it had impact and has impacted lower economic, socioeconomic communities. And again, when it comes to disasters that's like this, certainly no difference. One of the things you should be aware of is the equity reporting piece when it comes to FEMA. And you have FEMA's individual assistance program has established these reporting mechanisms to track the full and completion implementation of their actions. The individual assistance program, unlike the public assistance program, which many local governments are involved, it's a direct assistance to a disaster survivor. But this reporting tools, these recovery reporting and analytics division that FEMA has stood up, is committed to providing that information out and is going to be measuring those outcomes based on those actions. And then finally, inclusion. It is that outcome to ensure that diverse individuals can fully participate in the decision-making process and participate in the development of the organization and opportunities that are within an organization or group. So again, diversity, equity, and inclusion, making sure that all the whole community. I know that was a phrase that's been used in FEMA in the past. The whole community is a part of your process. So what we're talking about, FEMA's current initiatives, you're talking about proactively engaging the state, local, tribal, territorial partners, these local governments, local community leaders. We see a ton of that in debris management plans and debris management operations, the ability to get to those community leaders. I'll tell you this, in Fort Bend County, I know we've got some folks from Fort Bend County here, thank you. After the 2016 flood, getting information out to the public that there was an area that was flooded, predominantly Hispanic community, going and setting up a booth at the Catholic Church where they were having a neighborhood, a recovery meeting, and the county wanted to sit there and again meet the disaster survivor where they are. Again, another key phrase here, and ensuring that there's a policy and a program for implementation and how that's going to serve those underserved communities. And again, underserved communities may be a rural area, it may be a colonia like down in South Texas. It might be a urban, blighted community. That could be that underserved area, but acknowledging it and incorporating it into your program and your plan. All right, environmental justice. And you talk about environmental justice, the fair and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of their race, nationality, or origin. We were working, Brian and I were working on a debris management plan for the city of Seattle. And environmental justice and equity has been in office there with the city of Seattle for many, many years. And they really took the debris management sites and they wanted to make sure that those were geographically disseminated throughout their whole community. So when you talk about environmental justice, very, very easy, thing that people can understand is your debris management sites. Everybody's got the NIMBY. Everybody knows what that means. Not in my backyard. Nobody loves a debris management site that's right next to them. And but understanding that these sites need to be geographically disseminated throughout the community and not just one area is a big piece of this. So Nick, I know in selecting these debris management sites, that's always been a strategy that has you got to look at operational efficiencies, but you got to be able to take care and incorporate some of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, spreading those out, number one, because you need it for the operation. You can't really just have them all in, let's say, one area, right? And like John said, I mean, one of the hardest things you can do to yourself is to go set one up next to a neighborhood. One of the easiest things you can do for yourself is to use an old landfill or an old parking lot or something like that. That's kind of away from people. That's a good way to handle it.
Yeah, and one thing before I move on, I just saw that Valerie Blanton has put her contact information in the chat. I know that was something that many of you had asked for. So during the break, we'll post it here for everybody else to get, or we'll put, maybe that's a whiteboard. Hopefully it is whiteboard. Otherwise, I'm just going to be marking on the walls like my kids. But Valerie Blanton is, again, a great resource for you. So cultural competency and making sure that you're engaging with those, with those, that community, and understanding the cultural potentially biases or language barriers. I know we got some folks here from the city of Palacios. Thank you very much. I love that town. That's my home away from home, if you will. But a tremendous Vietnamese population there, and in a lot of other areas, and and understanding what are some of the cultural impacts that might have, some of the language barriers that you may have to overcome, and ensuring that your public information is disseminated out. And it might be a specific social media group, it may be a faith-based organization, in acknowledging that and making sure that that is a part of your again, debris management operation. Again, when it comes to disaster recovery, because of the disproportionate number of individuals at that lower socioeconomic scale that are minority and poor, they often live in those physically isolated and vulnerable pockets. And so understanding that they have poor access to communication, they have poor transportation and infrastructure, and really may be difficult to get to. Understanding that that may be a special crew that you have to assign to that area. It might be close to a lake. There's some of those pockets that are the lake people, which nothing against lake people, river people, coastal people, bay people, beach people, but you've got those pockets of communities, and you've got to be able to address that and acknowledge, hey, we may need to. We had to do this one time. We may had to just fly. We had to send teams out to flyer a certain area, like putting door hangers in that area so that we could communicate, because the next door, the paper, nothing was working, and we had to get their debris out. And so that's what we did there. And Nick, you've done some strategic.
I was going to mention that, in your community, there will typically be, let's say, a road superintendent. That's your least common denominator, kind of always knows what specific neighborhoods are like. At a higher level, if you ever want to look at something like this, you can actually pull in GIS, the Social Vulnerability Index, or SVI, and you can map these for your entire county or the state or whatever. And actually, it'll show you your most vulnerable community populations by that index. So that's another useful tool.
That SVI, the Social Vulnerability Index, is a planning tool that's being integrated into some of the HUD programs, their community development block grant programs, their CDBG mitigation programs. I understand, and again, it is, and now I'm starting to think that's how we found that community that I was telling you about. All the dots, all the pickup locations were on a map, and there was just this one area that didn't have any dots. So we used GIS and figured it out. It was an area that was just, again, kind of isolated, and this was a hurricane, so everybody's impacted. I don't care, rich, poor, black, white, whatever. The community was impacted. So we used GIS, and we got the teams out there, and we started papering that area, and finally got the debris out. Again, whether it is a language barrier, questionable immigration status, or whether it is distrust of the government, you've got to understand that is a cultural part. And debris collection, everybody's got it. Everybody's impacted the same. And so, again, acknowledging that and understanding how you get to that. Some recommendations that we have is partnering with those community organizations, getting that local leader, whether it is a faith-based leader, a community leader, whoever it is, and partnering with them to say, hey, look, we've got these assets here. Or, for example, I know you were mentioning, Ricardo was mentioning that volunteer group. That we've had volunteer groups come down from Minnesota or Montana. Hey guys, and they are down here for 1 week, and they come to you and say, hey, we want nothing more than to help your community get debris to the right of way? Well, partnering with your faith-based organizations, understanding where they need to go, or community-based organization is a great way to get there. In addition, working with the media, developing culturally appropriate material for response and preparedness type activities is a huge piece of this. Considering the local business community, whether that could be a valuable resources that they have, technological, logistical capabilities that can push that information out there. We've, again, whether it's those hubs, a lot of communities will stick together and targeting. And I love what, Nick had recommended, that road supervisor. I mean, they know the community. They know, hey, what street's here, or this is this neighborhood. They go to this church. They, go to this
Exactly.
bingo hall. I mean, whatever.
They know that road was built in 1958 and it's open ditch.
And that is a huge way. I mean, and again, I think acknowledging and understanding this has been a part of, the debris operation, integrating into your plan and being able to report on it, I think is a big piece of this. In addition to some of these other cultural or language or race or age, is your recommendations for functional needs. Understanding that you have the functional need aspect. And Brian, I know you've been a part of the planning effort. Any recommendations for accessing, functional needs populations?
Yeah, so I mean, we're just trying to work with those organizations to make sure that information is sent out broadly. So individuals who have whatever disability it is, they can still collect that information. Working with those organizations, I've worked with groups that do the captioning, to make sure so you're putting information out. If you're doing an interview or something, that's captioned so people can read it, or the signing, American Sign Language, radio interviews. I mean, just pushing information out however you can, so it's broadly enough so any of those folks who may have those language barriers or any other barriers or physical barriers can get that information. So they'll be able to be prepared and be able to respond appropriately to an incident.
Yeah, I think that understanding those languages and is a tremendous part of how you integrate DEI into your program. Before we move into the diversion from landfills, we are up for one more break here, and it is, I'm going to call the official HGAC clock close to 10:45. So we will rejoin right at 10:50 or just slightly before. So if you could please be back in your seats. If you need to return any emails or take a bio break, please do so. I think we still have some coffee, water available, and during the break, we'll put Valerie's information here for everybody in person to see. Thank you, everybody. All right, thanks so much, everyone. Aaron just told me it's 10:52, so we're gonna go ahead and get started again. I appreciate your attention and staying with us here this morning. We have really a couple of more sections of this to go over. We're gonna be talking about debris management and when it comes to diverting material from landfills. Then we're also going to go into debris management planning and some of the planning tools. And then finally, the private property debris removal. But before we get started, Aaron has got a question from our audience remotely.
Well, it's not a question, but there was chat going on and I
Okay.
thought I would just share it with everybody
Yes.
here. So somebody was talking about the Texas Emergency Management Conference in a couple of weeks. It's an annual conference with hundreds of workshops over a 4-day time frame, and you can register and get information on the TDM website. Go check it out.
San Antonio, Texas, right?
It does say in beautiful San Antonio on the Riverwalk. Starts on May 31st.
That's a great plug for that conference. It's a great way. You know, there's always, this is kind of conference season, if you will. There's conferences like the National Hurricane Conference, but one of the most honest to goodness, just educational conferences that are out there is the Texas Division of Emergency Management. I think they're calling it the conference now, but it really is a conference that's attended by thousands of individuals. I think one year it was close to 5,000 people at the Henry B. Gonzalez. Just a great location, very walkable. Has a lot of paths, if you will. So it has information for finance folks, public health. It also has information for public works, and it's got some classes on debris management. So if you want to get more involved in having more information on debris management, that's a great place to go to talk about FEMA, what it is, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much for those individuals bringing it up on the chat there. In that virtual environment. So again, diverting material from landfill. When you look at some of the studies that H-GAC has put together over the last several years about the landfill capacity, having an understanding of how difficult it is to site a landfill. You don't want to have, somebody said they can't hear. Okay, I don't know what to tell you. I got the mic on. If y'all can confirm in the chat if you can hear. I can hear you. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Scott. So yes, so when it comes to diverting material from landfill, you can really, these debris operations and the amount of material, it's certainly going to impact. Even if you divert all of your material, the public-facing debris removal program, there's certainly going to be a number of private haulers that are going to be sending debris there. So diverting it and finding that is extremely important. So when it comes to debris management and the landfills, reduction and being able to reuse the material, recycling and composting, through maybe energy recovery, and then finally through treatment and disposal, with the ability to divert the material really hinges on your public information and your public being able to divert that material, to source separate it at the curb, and showing people that they don't need just a big pile of trees and drywall and couches all in one place, and being able to communicate that to your faith-based organizations who are active in disasters, your VOADs, it's the volunteer organizations active during or in disasters, is a great way to increase your ability to hit the top of the pyramid, which is the ability to reduce it or even potentially reuse it. So when it comes to reduction methods, air curtain incineration is probably the most widely used means when it comes to burning, especially in a suburban or even a rural environment. And I know, Ricardo, you've been a part of these debris management sites. Anything to watch out for when it comes to air curtain incineration or, those types of reduction activities?
Right. So for this method of reduction by the air current incineration, you would want to keep in mind one, the location of where this is taking place. You might have a few weather shutdowns. If it's a very windy day, it might shift the smoke certain areas that maybe to a residential area that you don't want that going through. It is one of the more cost efficient ways. Typically in your contract, this would be about half the cost of a standard grinding, which is also another commonplace. Typically, we don't really come across this more in the urban areas, but in a lot of the rural areas, they do prefer this method. And besides that, it reduces the debris down by a lot, where you're just left with residual ash. A lot of times that can be, based on your permit, that can just be deposited across the site, and if not, you have a minimal amount of debris that have to be hauled out to the landfills or wherever, whichever areas that are close by that would take that ash debris.
So again, open areas for burning, understanding that there may be some shutdowns due to wet weather days as well as wind, and in wind direction, and then also one of the most important things is having ample space. You don't want to be in a situation where the pile catches on fire. When it comes to reduction, I hadn't moved there yet. There it is. Okay, wait, before we move on, Aaron, we have a question from the audience.
Yes, it says, does TCEQ require air quality monitoring when burning?
Righto?
Typically, no, not in this area. A lot of times it is out in the rural areas. And then depending if they're doing if the setup is for a pit, it's pretty minimal. So it kind of really depends more on your location and the permit.
You might have some situations at a site come up where you or your contractor decide to do some proactive air monitoring. I have seen examples of that. Back to the burning thing, in my experience, I think, like John said, in an urban environment, especially in Houston, I personally haven't seen a burn site since Hurricane Ike. We did run one on the eastern part of town, and even in its proximity to adjacent residential receptors, it does become a little challenging. So I think in our urban environment, you're going to see a lot more DMS, grinding of vegetative debris and trying to get that to a beneficial use like recycling or mulching.
And certainly that is the most common, most expensive, and the one that you're going to worry about getting rid of is the grinding. And I know that you can get quite a bit of reduction, 4-to-1 here, but there is some residual and some things that you need to think about when it comes to a grinding operation. So I know, Nick, you've worked in a lot of these debris management sites. Any recommendations? Anything that you've seen from your perspective working with contractors?
Sure. It's been a while. You think about it. So in our region, Harvey, a big storm, was in this area mostly a flood event. So most of the debris stream here locally was C&D debris from flooded homes. It wasn't a large mass quantity of trees like maybe further down in South Texas. So Harvey didn't generate, didn't have a lot of mulching type debris management sites. What we did have in the region was compaction really, and management of C&D, basically crushing and compacting it like in this picture down to about a 50% reduction, which again helps save that landfill space. To what John asked, I guess, about challenges is, like we mentioned before, the longer those sites go on, your debris piles are going to heat up. It happens a lot in vegetative piles, and it does happen in C&D piles. So you really got to watch that. And again, just the folks who may be around you in these sites, whether that's the closest neighborhood nearby. In all these operations, you're going to have dust, particulates and stuff in the air from the grinding and the equipment working there and your debris constantly, trucks coming in and out. So those types of things are just the operational considerations that that you have to keep an eye on.
When you say heating up to a point where things catch on fire.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how difficult is it or how easy it is to put it out when a mulch pile catches on fire?
It is not very easy.
It is no. Listen. When it comes to this, making sure you have the appropriate breaks, you have the appropriate space, so that and you're finding a suitable disposal location, so you're moving it out quickly, almost as soon as you get it in. And I mean, Ricardo, you guys you've been a part of some situations like that. When does it usually happen? You know, when it comes to like a fire happening, something like that at a site.
Oh, with the fire, so a lot of it depends also, and also as quickly as you want to haul it out depends on the size of the actual DMS. So if you're dealing with a smaller site, obviously you're having to work a little quicker to get everything hauled out. Fires can kind of cause problems there too. Also, you want to keep in mind is the type of debris that's coming in. So a lot of times, if say for example you have a disaster that comes through and you're dealing with, say, multiple municipalities, if they're sharing a site, you don't want everything getting commingled. You want to keep the debris separated as much as you can. That way your totals in the end are properly allocated. So that's one thing we always try to keep in mind. If you have the space to keep everything separate, it makes it a lot easier in the end with less headaches. But really, besides that, I don't think.
No, and we've seen debris sites be 5-10 acre sites. We've seen them be 100-acre sites. Well, one of the things that Ricardo was mentioning is a commingled site, if you will. So say you're using a shared site, shared contractor. Maybe, like Palacios is Matagorda County and City of Palacios using the same site. What he's talking about is the data management on the back end. You want to make sure that you know exactly where the City of Palacios debris is coming from, as well as Matagorda County. It's not just one big pile, that one big happy debris family.
Right, and even if the site is too small where you're forced to commingle, luckily nowadays since everything is digital, you know exactly what's coming in, so it's easy to quantify in the end how much is coming out. So the risk of there not being reimbursement, it's a lot lower from being able to know what came in. You can basically calculate what's gone out.
Well, and so again, find what as Ricardo mentioned, the ability to find a debris site and find those end markets and those end uses can be a huge challenge. But metals, obviously you can have there, soils, concrete. We've seen a lot of that. Unfortunately, there's not a huge appetite for FEMA to be inclusive of concrete, but it is extremely important to start diverting that landfill, that debris, and finding those end markets. One of the things I will say is that when it comes to, and I know I've said this here in this with this audience before, but if there is a guy or a gal who comes to you and says, "Hey, I've got this great idea to take your debris. We're gonna put it here," and that is a harebrained idea, like something off of like Tom and Jerry, or it's off of like a Acme. If anything selling you by Acme, I would not take it. Wile E. Coyote says.
You mean, John, when he says, "I'm going to recycle all the carpet."
Absolutely.
You don't. Yeah, it's like.
Yeah, we're
no,
going to take this wood and then we're going to take it to the moon, and then you're not going to have to pay, and we're going to pay you for it. When they say that, you just should stop listening. You should really stop listening, and because it's going to be too good to be true. So, but you have to examine, do your due diligence. I know it, involve the landfill in the planning, involve recyclers. There are some really credible folks in this area. A lot of them in, north part of the Houston-Galveston area, a lot of them in East Texas that will take this material. I don't know, Ricardo, if you have to track all this, and sometimes it's a spider web of understanding where the material came from, where it was just, reduced, and where it is disposed of. But there's some examples that you've seen where we've had to send material in the past.
Right. So I know with the woody debris, so when it gets mulched down, it's a little easier. You can have one of our recent ones in Louisiana. We had even the residents would come with their own bags to gather the mulch. A lot of sites would take it on for layout over their landfills. We even had a few, like for example, paper mills that would take the debris. And then with the recently, like with the electronic waste, we would have to ship it all the way up to Dallas. So they were shipping all the electronic waste from Louisiana all the way to Dallas, because that was the closest site that was permitted to repurpose all the electronic waste. So sometimes it has to go a good ways.
You bring up some great points. The idea of having residents come and pick up some of this mulch, that to me, certainly it can work. I think from managing everybody's expectations, it may not be that, one-stop shop that's going to get rid of all of your material. It may be a great, way to connect with the community and have a great story, a human interest story. But when it comes to the volume, it's a tremendous effort. We actually, one war story here for you. There was out in San Marcos after the 2015 floods there. They actually found a buyer for logs. They had a tremendous amount of cypress trees that went down after the flood there, and a buyer there who made tables out of it. He ended up taking, I don't know, hundreds of these tree trunks for his operation. Actually paid money. Texas State University was the community that was involved in that. It was close to $10,000 that the university had gotten back from this operation. So it was, it can happen. But Nick, you've been involved with some of these. Is there any places that you guys?
One of the things we're really talking about here is it's at a certain point you saturate the market for, let's say, mulch.
Right.
And you can only get a mulch yard to take so much. Number one, they're permitted and regulated, and they may have certain capacity limitations. But then number two, your volume is just so much that you've basically saturated all the local mulching type markets. So I like the having residents be able to come get it idea. I think Hurricane Ike in Houston, I believe some of this stuff ended up being shipped to Louisiana or to some other like power plants who were able to take
waste to energy.
For waste to energy.
It certainly has gone overseas before. In the past, Italy had been a big buyer of this material. So we've seen that was back in 2005. Again, it is just continues to be a challenge. So start planning early. Understand where your debris in markets could be. Understanding that whether it's some of that reuse opportunities there, partnering with your landfill, and just getting an understanding that your ability to have some agricultural uses. I know we've had a few situations where we've spread it out over on some agricultural lands and kind of disked it into the ground there. So there are some ways that people have used that have been creative. I think it's creativity you have to balance with realism when it comes to this type of diversion. One of the case studies, I know Brian, you had done some research on this. Was there in the Northridge earthquake back in '94 with the number of structures structures there, 1.5 million tons of debris, and the city there in Los Angeles was able to recycle about 56% of the debris. The big thing there is whenever you can get concrete, that'll increase your diversion rate because there is such an ability to the in market, quite frankly, was a really, really great way to divert it from the landfill. Again, composting, another way there, which can, again, depending on how clean the material is, being able to compost it and get it into the soil. There's a lot of compost. I know what was the gentleman, Aaron, he would come to some of these events, or Cheryl, in the past, he was, there it is, yes, John Ferguson. He's been always a big advocate. I know, currently we've also got some opportunities to divert some soils. I know some of the Lake Houston operation, and that material, there's a lot of soil and sediment that's being pulled from Lake Houston right now. I know that's being diverted as well. Where is that material going?
So we've recently had
Tell a little bit about that story, I guess.
right. So they're on the west fork of on the northwest side of Lake Houston. There was a large, basically an island that built up from after Hurricane Harvey. A lot of the sand and silt from the Dallas area kind of came down to Houston, kind of put up an island there. So we utilized a large site that was close by. So essentially the island was excavated off, hauled off to this large site, and just spread out over the land. And we essentially removed that pretty large landmass within about 8 months.
And that material ended up going to some sand pits north. So there are some great ways to continue to divert this material. Not all of it. That, again, getting it on landfill, again, is going to be the most expensive way, and there are some other options out there. So I know, Brian, you've got findacomposter.com, which you were doing some research on this and being able to identify some sites there.
Yeah, so this is just one of the resources that's available. But findacomposter.com, it's all the different composting facilities. And so you can actually go online and to that website there, findacomposter.com, and find those type of facilities where you can compost that material, and hopefully link you with some resources to get rid of some of that stuff.
So it's not like it's not a dating site. It's not no. Not farmersonly.com, findacomposter.com. Oh, sorry, I might get that HR check mark for that comment right there. Sorry. Energy recovery here. Again, waste to energy offers a tremendous value because at the end of the day, this material, you're trying to get it out as soon as you could. It's not always the cleanest. We've also heard, I talked a lot with the debris haulers there that are responsible for reducing this debris. Not to get too inside baseball here, but there are certain screens that they use in certain chip size that may impact what type of end markets. You're balancing speed with the ability to divert it. So, it certainly can have a lot of challenges there. So the American biorefining, this facility here was used by a lot of, again, it was able to salvage a ton of trees. I know, Brian, were you able to talk to those folks, or had found some information on them following Hurricane Rita there, for the biomass facility?
Yeah, I mean, there's some case studies. The EPA has listed several different case studies where they list some of these different, best practices on how to get rid of debris. And one of the things they mentioned was this biorefining facility where they were able to take a lot of the trees and other vegetative waste and actually use it to generate energy, or they were able to ship it to European countries. They're able to use it to generate power. And so I think there's some other facilities across the United States that are able to do that as well. So it's just another way to get rid of or take that what's potentially waste and use it for something useful to generate energy.
I think again, the one big thing here is a takeaway, whether it's procurement, whether it's disposal, whether it is public information. There are so many resources out there on the web, on the internet that can help you as a community. If just putting a little legwork. The last thing we want you to do is throw your hands up and say, hey, we don't know what to do with it. Again, resources in the private sector, the Council of Governments here. H-GAC has a ton of information. Again, you have here Energy Recovery Council providing assistance for waste to energy. And again, I think it's working with your contractor to make sure that, you know, if diverting waste is important to you, then make that a part and parcel of your contractor's debris management plan. If you're in a situation where it's total loss, total devastation, Moore, Oklahoma, or Joplin, Missouri, your ability to divert waste is going to be minimal. Excuse me. Looking down at Rockport, down in the coastal Bend region, just north of Corpus Christi, it really, I mean, just due to the devastation, the type of your ability, depending on what kind of storm surge you have, your recovery rate, your diversion rate drops astronomically. So now we want to go talk about other resources here with EPA and their debris management planning and debris recovery toolkit.
Yeah, so the EPA, they kind of did a test run in Region 5, which is, I guess, the Midwest part of the country. And they developed this tool to kind of help link people with resources. And so, so what they did, they took these different kinds of facilities, landfills and other recycling facilities, and they made it available, and they kind of tracked them, put them on a map where you can kind of click on it and find resources. And it worked really well, and it was really popular. And the people who lived in those areas in Region 5 just thought it was great. And so then the EPA said, well, by golly, let's just spread it across the country. And so they did. And so they have a map here that shows all these different facilities that can take debris. And so in the different types of debris, whether it be a landfill, recycling facility. And so green facilities with the green dots, this is kind of a map of our part of Southeast Texas here. But so green dots are the recyclers, composters, transfer facilities, demolition companies. Orange sites are landfills, and then purples are facilities that do both landfill and recovery service. So maybe they have a function where they do recycling as well. And so what you can do, you pull up, you go to the website, and you kind of zone in on the area that you're interested in your jurisdiction or what's around your jurisdiction, and you can click on a dot. And as you can see there on the right side of the screen there, you can click on a dot, and it'll tell you what type of company it is, the name of the company, their contact information, even their satellite coordinates, what types of debris they take. And so you can, with that information, at least you can kind of narrow down some options on what you can do with the debris. And you can contact this company to make sure they're good to go with taking it and coordinate with them in planning. So, and there's also, want to throw in there, there's also some resources on the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. They have some resources, some recycling resources listed as well. But I just thought that's a really neat little tool that you can use that has a lot of resources in it. You can just look around the areas that you're going to be responding to, and just click on those resources and see what might be available to you.
One thing to make sure of, and I'm not trying to suggest that this site doesn't have the right credentials or permits and all that good stuff, but double check it wherever all your debris goes to final disposition. Whether it's that recycler down the road, you just want to make sure they've got their proper state permits so that you've got that for your FEMA reimbursement, later on.
One of my favorite, opportunities to hold a class like this, hold a workshop, was in March of a few years back, and we had a March Madness theme to that, and where we talked about, we did just a little bit of a bracket. We talked about what are the most important rules, which ones are, out of all the different rules, FEMA eligibility, cost reimbursable, all those sorts of things. Number one made it to the championship was environmental rules, meaning out of all the screw ups that could happen, we we overpaid for this, or we lost this documentation, or the dog ate my homework, or whatever it is. Screwing up an environmental rule is the one, that's the one of the 7 deadly sins, or that's one of the unforgivable things that there's just no way around. So understanding.
And it makes the paper.
Yeah, that one does. That one really makes the paper. I mean, dumping methyleth will kill you dead, or, I mean, we had a big C&D fire or whatever it is. That's the one that will makes good news.
What's that example right now? Hot topic in Alabama, where the DOT had its state permits for all of its DMS sites, I think, but they didn't have the historical commission documentation and approval. And so FEMA has come in and, obviously the applicant spent millions in debris removal costs, and FEMA's saying, well, a significant number of those costs in the millions are not eligible because of that issue. So that's why we
huge.
stress document, permit authorizations, all the steps that the agencies are requiring. You just want to make sure you have it.
And that goes with endangered species too. Endangered species, the wetlands, understanding that you don't want to put a debris management site in a floodplain, floodway, flood anything. Having the right disposal sites, as Nick mentioned, having all those permits and having it all documented in one place and buttoned up with a nice bow on it is extremely, extremely important. And again, that's why I said at the beginning of this, when it comes to landfill diversion, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so again, work with your contractor, work with the state, work with, and there's so many, nobody wants to see you screw up. I mean, nobody out there. So there's so many resources out there that we want to highlight. So finally, we're going to be wrapping things up with an in-depth discussion of private property debris removal. And private property debris removal, or commonly heard as PPDR, is that program that's in the worst of the worst disasters. So think of Alabama tornadoes, or think of Joplin tornadoes, think of Hurricane Ike on the Bolivar Peninsula. Most recently, Hurricane Laura in southwest Louisiana, in the Lake Charles, Calcasieu Parish, Sulphur, Westlake, and now most recently Hurricane Ida in southeastern Louisiana. But private property debris removal is just that. It's actually going on to an individual's home or an individual's property and removing hazards. In addition to all those hurricanes, wildfires. These are tremendous programs. So you have the more complicated and the more difficult the program, the higher level of scrutiny. It's going to get more expensive. It's going to be more documentation. Think of this. My favorite, when I was a kid, I'd go to my grandmother's house and she loved The Price is Right. And my favorite game on The Price is Right was that yodeling man. He would go up what was it, cliffhanger? Oh, God, my favorite. That's what that comes to my mind. The bottom is right-of-way debris removal. And then it goes up to parks debris removal. Then we get to leaners and hangers. At the height of this is the cliff, is the private property debris removal. If you remember one thing, remember that yodeler, and he's about to hop off that cliff, and we don't want to do that because this one is a place where you can fall off very, very easily. But when we talk about PPDR or private property debris removal, you're really going into that situation where that individual does not have the means to remove the debris from their site. So this is after, again, Mrs. Johnson, she must live there. Mrs. Johnson's there, that's her house. She had her son come in from Minnesota to help her bring the debris out. She had volunteer organizations from Arizona that came in to help them out. And it still looks like this. And she just does not have the means, doesn't have the yellow iron to move this to the right of way. And at that point, this is where that local government can come in and remove the debris from that property. Again, this is a program that is funded under the FEMA Public Assistance Program. One of the things we haven't really hit on yet, but I will, is that the Public Assistance Program is funded by FEMA at 75% of a federal cost share, 25% local government. So there is something on the hook. Now, there are opportunities for an increase to that federal cost share up to 90% or up to 100%. So there is a federal participation, and even sometimes the state of Texas. Following Hurricane Harvey, the state of Texas filled the disaster contingency fund, or for lack of a better term, that's really what it is, but to help and aid local government in a cost share for things like debris removal. But again, this is something where you as the local government are taking it on and including and using your resources to clean it up. Now, why will this occur? Is that it's very limited circumstances where this debris is threatening the public health and safety and economic recovery of the community. The reason that is in red is because you should be just using that at all points. That is, again, when you talk about arguments for why something is done, threaten public health and safety, or slows down the economic recovery of the community, that is the saving grace for a lot of different programs. We have seen that a number of different times in getting things eligible. It can't be because my commissioner told me to do it, or city council voted on it, or my contractor said it was going to be eligible. This is that widespread impact. We were in Albany, Georgia, which is in the southwestern part of the state. It was a tremendous tornado, 2 tornadoes within 3 weeks of one another, wasn't it? 3 weeks of one another. The one tornado came in and hit one part of the city or the county, and then a second tornado picked up the rest. It was like a 7-10 split, and it hit it. I mean, good, incredible people down there. Lots of pecan farmers, just incredible folks. And they had a lot of mobile home units, trailer parks, what have you. That's what we're talking about when we talk about private property debris removal. We're talking about a community, again, just normal situation. This right here, an individual who is in a neighborhood. We're also talking about trailer parks as well. We could even be talking about multifamily facilities, but it is a tremendous challenge. I know, Ricardo, you've been a part of getting these approved. What's the burden of proof? Talk about that. How does it really work to get this, blessed by the powers that be?
Right. So, like John mentioned, this is typically towards the end of the. There's a good time has passed since the disaster has come through. So, at this point, you've already done your assessment, so you know what areas are needing this. One of the headaches that comes with this, you would assess an area, and then once you actually start the intake, you'll notice that there's not as many people are applying as you would think. So it's a very slow process with a lot of documentation that's required. So and what you keep in mind also, if you're out in certain specific areas, you have to provide all your insurance documentation. You have to provide your ownership. You have to make sure your ROE is set up, and the contract language there is ironclad. Typically with the ROE, that's the whole, essentially the hold harmless agreement that keeps you as the county or the city not held liable for any damage, as well as a contractor. All these need to be filed and put in place. So one of the things we had a hard time with recently is kind of just setting up your intake center and making sure it's getting out to the public. So you want everybody to know where they can go to sign up, how it works, and then just make sure, just explain all the insurance. If they're getting paid for if they have certain claims on their house, their home insurance or property insurance, that needs to be relayed back to the county or city, whoever's running the program, to make sure there's no duplication of benefits. But really, the intake is really the stressful part of it.
So when it comes to eligibility, the private property, you must have a determination that this is in the public interest. So step one, go to the public health authority and get them to sign a letter that says the debris is so widespread, it's so bad in this community that I am declaring a public health and safety threat. There's some standard language that places like Jefferson County has. In Harris County, I've seen them, essentially declare this a public health and safety nuisance, and therefore, it's so widespread. We have now demonstrated it, and again, that is an acceptable. Generally speaking, that document right there by the Graham Pumbaa of public health within your community, them declaring it will help check off number one. Then looking at the benefit to an area or a limited group of individuals that, hey, we're going to open this to the entire county, entire community. You can't say, I'm only opening this to, people with odd number, addresses on, on streets that are named after Ivy League schools. All right. It has to be the entirety of a community, and that will help demonstrate it. In addition to that, maps. Going out and doing surveys. So Ricardo, when you talk about surveys, you're talking about what? Like people in cars with photographs, or what are you talking about to get that answer of what Brian said? How big is big and how bad is bad?
Right. So the initial assessment would be more of a roadside survey, because obviously you can't step on property without an ROE. So typically what we do is you'll do a roadside survey. You know more or less which areas were affected. So you can mark on the maps, you can quantify it whichever ways as you can, and then you'll know which areas would have that amount. And then once everybody does sign up, you do a more thorough survey. You're actually on site. You're marking all the hazards with geospatially, with documenting all the photos, showing damages to any structures that need to be taken down, as well as the any piles that have accumulated there on site, or any hazards such as the trees that are on private property that could be a public health hazard.
So in step one, you got that public health authority letter. In step two, you get your code enforcement, or you get somebody out there just driving around and saying, hey, just kind of 1, 2, 5. I mean, you're just kind of getting a rough order of magnitude. All right. Step three is, again, taking that rough order of magnitude and then submitting that to FEMA for a private property, or actually submitting it to the state. Let me stop there. Submitting it to the state, a request for private property debris removal. They, bless it, and really that is when you can set up that outreach center. I mean, one of the things that I know Fort Bend County did in the past, in 2016, was set up a flood recovery and permitting center in the past. I've seen that done in Boulder County. They had a name for it called the FERPIC, which was the Flood Recovery Permit and Information Center. It was the one-stop shop. It was the one-stop shop to find out from everything in your community, and that is where they did their intake for private property debris removal. So now, at that point, that's step 4. You've now taken Mrs. Johnson. You did that survey. Mrs. Johnson has come into the community or your community center, and now you're actually filling stuff out. And you talked about ROE, and so but we would define that. What does that form look like? How difficult is it to do? I mean, how do you walk them through that process?
Right. So for the ROE, your right of entry as well as your hold harmless agreement, that essentially it liberates the program and anyone that's running the program from any liability of anything that happened on site. So that's essentially step 1 of the right of entry. The second part of that will be the ownership, any ownership documents to show that they're not a renter that's just applying for the program, that they actually own the property. And then a big part of that too is also that we've come across in past projects where say the parents had passed away and title of the house has been passed down to the siblings, you would need all signatures of everybody that's tied to the property. So that becomes a struggle at times too, especially if you have one sibling's in Minnesota, the other one's in Florida, one's not talking to the other for whatever reason. So there's quite a few headaches that can come across that, as well as, and third most important part is the insurance documentation that I mentioned earlier. So if they receive any, obviously the PPDR, there's no cost to the homeowner, but if they did receive any payments for any specific debris removal or tree removal, that amount of money would have to be given back to the county or city, whoever's running the project. That way there's not a duplication of benefits.
And that's a big piece of this. And I'll talk about this, the request letter. That was that step 3. So step 1 is the public health deeming it, an immediate threat. We did that initial survey. Step 3 is going to, and again, I don't think I impressed upon enough the fact that this request has to go to the top person in the FEMA hierarchy for this disaster, the Federal Coordinating Officer, FCO. It's got to go through the state, documenting that this is an immediate threat, that there's a legal responsibility, and then, as you heard from Ricardo, that indemnification by the federal government. And again, when you talk about going back to diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI elements, this is an incredible way to really make sure that the whole community is a part of the recovery, and including that as part of your justification would be a beneficial piece of this. But when it comes to EHP, I mean, I know Nick, you're an environmental guy there at heart. Got to talk through what are some of those EHP considerations when it comes to getting on property there.
Yeah, you can, have appropriate staff review, aging of the house, looking at historical information. Is this property that we're going to do the PPDR on in a registered historic district? You can initiate coordination with your state historic preservation officer, and those are the things that FEMA is going to be looking at or asking those questions about. Obviously, for the most part, when in the examples that we're showing where it's homes and things like that, you're not really getting out into, let's say, you wouldn't want a contractor going into a wetland area or something like that to do PPDR necessarily without some more specific approvals. But generally, you're okay there.
We've seen in riverine flooding, we saw it in in Hayes County following the 2015 floods, when a lot of those properties were in the wetlands, were in the floodway, that the EHP requirements and making sure that all of that is done. We saw it mentioned in Albany, Georgia. They had a very historic district with a lot of historic trees. So those were something that you needed to coordinate with. I know in Galveston, there was a tremendous Galveston Historical Commission where that required some coordination. So, right of entry, getting the actual form, verifying that all of the information is correct, photographs, including site sketches and the information that's presented, having that together, your assessment, actually going there on site with the proper personal protective equipment and all of that information, having that together, and your EHP is tremendously important for this. So that right of entry form, providing the consent, indemnifies and hold harmless, and then there is a duplication of benefits so that insurance proceeds will come back. We've had to do that in a number of wildfire cases where the insured has a rider on their particular insurance policy for debris removal, and FEMA has now required, and really it's always been part of this, that the local government actually take steps to obtain any insurance proceeds from the individual, and in certain cases where that individual has paid for debris removal, something in a previous way, that individual actually provides those receipts and demonstrates that insurance money was paid out. So it's extremely, extremely important. And I know we're hammering this, a lot because of the fact that when we get to those catastrophic situations, we get into the worst case scenario, that private property debris removal is something that, you are all going to face. And so here's an example of a private property debris removal form. I think this one is, this one is state of Florida's form here. Again, a lot of information on the website, and pretty basic information. Always, say that your lawyer should, review it, but some good information out there that will protect you. So with this, I'm going to pause for any questions that you all might have as part of this engagement. Cheryl, is that a hand up? I thought it might be. Anyone in remotely have any questions for us here, or anybody here in the audience? Yes, ma'am. Oh, hey, Phil, Brian.
I got my job.
You had one job there, Brian. Oh, he's got to run over there. He's more of a Jerry Springer type guy, I'll be honest with you.
Thank you. I'd like more in-depth information about senior living facilities and apartments and the apartment managers where Metro is concerned to evacuate these people. Y'all mentioned it just briefly in the beginning. I think there's a number you can call to be registered that you have to be evacuated. And if that person does have mobility challenges and they're on medication, what are the reminders to make sure to take a certain amount of their medication with them for an extended period? And how does that all work with Metro?
Sure. So the question was, for those of you online here, is about senior centers, senior living facilities, some of the apartments, multifamily type situations there, and some of the concerns and some of the issues associated with that. When we talk first, a lot of those from a registry perspective, Brian, I think that's the 211 registry there that individuals can register. We in our debris management planning, that's something that we also recommend including. Are those senior citizens, especially when it comes to the emergency road clearing activities, because oftentimes, those are the individuals who aren't evacuated or potentially are, that they do need the emergency access to vehicles. From a debris management perspective, generally speaking, those are the responsibility of the owners and the property owners to get that debris out. But when it comes to road clearing activities, that's certainly something that needs to be taken into consideration. And Brian, I know you've done a lot of public health preparedness planning and other types of planning process. Anything more to add there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of work has been done in evacuation planning, particularly after what we saw with Katrina, in Louisiana. There was a lot of work, and then we had Irma that came right after that, and so there was a lot of work that's been done, and there was a state group that met on how to safely get people out, and so I think that's when a lot of that 211 was set up, so people can call in and register if they have a need if they need assistance to get out. And so, yeah, it's just, and every year there's usually a push, for people to identify themselves if they need assistance in evacuating or if they need a ride, and then the state has spent a lot of resources to set up these hub and spoke systems, to get people out, to get them to an area where receiving centers across the state to receive these people that are equipped to house and feed them and care for, even bring their pets and those kind of things. So a lot of work has been done in that area. So I mean, based on the lessons learned from some of these past incidences, and a lot of lessons learned from ambulance companies that were there was a lot of issues with ambulance companies trying to evacuate people from nursing homes and hospitals, and so there were a lot of lessons learned there that were taken to heart, and so a lot of planning has been done in that area. So if you have a specific question about evacuation and those kind of things, probably the 211 would be the first stop, or just the local emergency management office.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Thank you, Brian. Aaron, we
Yeah.
got some questions. 3.
Got 3.
All
right,
right.
so-
They're coming in.
So the first one is, do you need a ROE for gated communities needing debris removal?
Oh, great question. Rights of entry for gated communities. After Hurricane Harvey, FEMA had, I don't know, maybe relaxed is the right word, but provided some additional guidance for making it easier to get into those gated communities. That certainly gated communities and private roads has always been a big challenge because of the fact that not all gated communities have Thurston and Lovey Howe living in them. It could be a private road that is just owned by the residents, and it's just out there, and the county has never annexed it. And those individuals who may be low to moderate income, they don't have the same access that those who are living on public roads are. So, Ricardo, I know you've been doing this, especially in Southwest Louisiana, who we're all in FEMA Region 6. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Right. So for the gated community, especially during Harvey, we did utilize the right of entries for these gated communities. A lot of that also stems from when you get these large activations, the equipment that is allowed is ideally we would like to use the trucks that have the pickers on them. A lot of times you're forced to, some of these contractors are forced to utilize the like bulldozers and excavators. So that can also be another issue for the jurisdiction if they commit a lot of damages. So the right of entry is kind of, it's a safety net, as well as if it's not publicly accessible to the public, then they wouldn't be eligible. So that's where and that's why the right of entry would also need to be required. But like John mentioned, recently on the past changes, the private roads were not eligible, but now if it's a private road that's publicly accessible, then they're allowed for pickups.
Yeah, again, it is a challenging process with those gated communities. But it's one that certainly comes up every disaster. In addition to that, I think that needs to be, if your community does have private roads and gated communities, where they are, they're expecting service because you guys provide garbage service and water service to them. Seeking some assistance from someone like Valerie Blanton, her information is right there, is of great benefit.
Next one is, have you experienced logistical issues with the unplanned arrival of relief materials while removing debris?
Unplanned arrival of relief materials. What do we?
I wonder if the question is about relief organizations bringing debris out from the house to the street. Is that?
Well, that's
To me, it sounds like water showing up when you're trying to remove debris and it's getting in the way, like bottles of water. I don't know. That's
the one thing I would say
materials.
is that when you're doing any truck staging, whether it's truck certifications or you're setting up distribution sites, we've found sometimes that requires some coordination. We've had some disruptions there where we had planned a debris management site at this location. It was a fantastic, great ingress, egress, and it was wonderful to get in and out. And then that's where the utilities, Alabama Power shows up, and CP&L or Duke Energy. They send all their assets to this one area, and you were going to be doing truck certs there. So we've had that situation. That's happened a lot, or that it was a citizen drop-off site that you had in your debris management plan, and then that also becomes a water and ice distribution center. If it comes to disruptions related to volunteer organizations, if that is the question, we've certainly experienced situations where all of a sudden you think an area is clear and some random group shows up and works one solid weekend on these 10 streets, and then boom, you had started releasing your contractor assets, and all of a sudden you need to come back to that area. So I think, didn't that happen, Nick? I think in a couple of times where just that's been a disruption is when you get these volunteer organizations, because they'll just,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can, typically the earlier in the process that something like that were to happen, then the better off you are. More of an in-game, I guess, issue. If you think about it, like if you had an area with flooded homes, like in Harvey, we had neighborhoods near the reservoir that had water in them for weeks, or a month, and then that person doesn't come touch their house for a long time, then, obviously that's just more debris that came out later on, kind of into the process. So.
Yeah, I think it's worth being aware of some of the other programs, like the state had a PREPS mission and a dollar mission. Some of these other housing missions, that generates debris. So just suffice it to say that it is a dynamic environment. It's not, you're not operating in a bubble. You are certainly operating in a way, weather days. And then all of a sudden they had a big flood. So it flooded all these homes.
And then you're picking back up on date C to D.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. We may have taken your question in a couple of different directions, but something wrong with the sound? Not sure. Okay. Well, what I can tell you is it's a dynamic environment. There's all sorts of external factors that will, have an impact on your ability to complete the debris mission.
The person did clarify bottled water, diapers blocked streets after Hurricane Sandy. If that changes your response.
I have not really seen.
I haven't either. I think it goes back to just, picking a location that maybe you operationally control to do, let's say your truck certification or your coordination and logistics, that sort of stuff, and not get mixed up with like a regional distribution center.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard some emergency management coordinators kind of complain that the stuff they really need, they can't get, but the stuff they may not need right away, they seem to be overwhelmed with. And so then you're kind of left with, okay, how do we manage this? And, it's kind of, it also kind of boils down to donations management. If you have a donations management plan, that's another thing that, we don't get into with debris necessarily, but it can be something that, people, you can kind of get overwhelmed with this stuff, and then you're trying to store it, you're trying to distribute it. And so partnering with these different organizations that can help in that regard, there's a lot of them in this region that kind of specialize in different things, where they handle different types of goods and can help distribute some of that. So it's kind of linking, having a donations, if we're talking about the right thing here, but having a donations plan can kind of help you to organize that. And what are some resources in the area that can help distribute that and manage those goods?
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. We got one more.
Oh, we got two more.
Fantastic.
Okay. Next one, are mobile home communities eligible for residential debris removal assistance, or is this considered commercial and the responsibility of the property management to have debris removed?
Ricardo, I'm going to throw that over to you.
Right. So we actually had that recently in Louisiana. So they are considered commercial. So typically what would happen is the jurisdiction would apply. And then once FEMA, once it's approved by whoever the program manager is, then it'd be eligible for debris pickup. But then, like I mentioned earlier with the sites, you want to kind of keep in mind, you want to keep the debris separate, because it's almost, if it's, even though they're all C and D or saves veg, it's like its own debris class. So once it's approved, it's usually only approved for a certain time period. So, and that's where you got to kind of make sure that the public knows that you're on it's a short time period to get it out, to where you get picked up. And then, but yeah, typically that's the route.
Yeah, anything that has a title or wheels, or, so I'm talking boats, cars, mobile homes, those are all complicated. Things get complicated when it comes to titled items and debris operations. So Ricardo's is exactly right. You know, having some good guidance and make sure that is, everybody's checked off on it is important.
And the next one, during removal of debris from communities, et cetera, there's a lot of PM 2.5 dust particles, especially from cancer-causing drywall, extra diesel fumes from equipment, more carbon from chainsaws, cutting up trees. Does anybody monitor the air? If not, then who would be responsible for that? Or has there been any studies that address it?
It's a great question. Nick, I know you're our environmental guy. I'm throwing it over to you. Passing the ball.
We have seen some operations perform air monitoring. I can tell you I've done it. Did it during Harvey at a couple of sites for various reasons. One of them happened to be proximity of a lot of debris next to a neighborhood. Really couldn't do anything about it. I mean, in the neighborhood that it was close to, this was actually behind Bear Creek, off of Highway 6 and Clay Road. So everybody in that area had been impacted. It made the most sense, and we were able to, expedite debris removal from that location due to that DMS site. But yeah, when you start crushing, it's not even that when you start managing that volume of C and D debris, you will generate dust. Same thing on, vegetative sites as well. So, air monitoring is good. Kind of minimizes issues down the road. What's another consideration?
Asbestos containing material, especially on private property debris removals, and having the proper operational controls that material is tested. Certainly you can build into your program certain protocols where, aging of the structure, if it's pre-1978, that's the number? That number comes to mind. No, that they're all considered asbestos containing, and having the proper monitoring there. We've done a lot of programs in California where they have some significant protocols when it comes to soil testing of the material, especially after wildfires. Air monitoring operations. So air monitoring, soil operation. They had so it's less. I would say less here in Texas. I think California really leads the way. Colorado has done a lot of that, especially after wildfires. Oregon has done that. I'm really now honing in on some of those wildfire states, and I think there's going to be some additional guidance that's targeted at some of the environmental impacts of wildfires, and how what you need to do and what are the best practices there. But again, when it comes to your debris sites, that's where most of it happens, and certainly those that are in those residential areas.
All right, that's all we got.
Fantastic. Anybody here? Anything? Any questions? Anything like that? Well, listen, this has been fantastic. I certainly appreciate everybody. We have some. Oh, there it is. The plug for the. Everybody has an evaluation form. If you could please do that. Aaron, how about the ones online? How can they provide feedback?
Andrea has just posted it in the chat, so everybody online can go ahead and click that little link, and you can take the same evaluation that everybody in the room has.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We value your feedback. I know H-GAC, and the team here, We go over it. We tailor future. I know HGAC tailors future workshops and planning efforts based on the feedback that you provide. So anything you can do to provide some guidance is extremely beneficial here. So Aaron, any closing comments, words, anything like that? Oh.
Thank y'all very much for your presentation. And as a reminder, we will be posting these slides, the recording, if it didn't mess up. And yeah, that's it. It will be on our website. So we will try and send out an email to everybody once that gets posted. So
Awesome. Thank you all again. Thank you very much for coming. Have a very safe drive home. For those of you who need to know, which is everybody, Mother's Day on Sunday. I gotta make a plug for that. I forgot it one year, never forget it again. So that is the day we can all appreciate. So have a very great rest of your week. Aaron, I'm gonna not touch anything on this to.
and I see a question about PDH hours, getting a certificate. We did not apply for any kind of hours. Do y'all, I mean, is that something you have to apply for?
I think you can generally make one. And
Okay,
if
so
they have
we don't have to
certain-
get approval for like this course?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. So they make their own certificate. Okay.